Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Erica and Benjamin Sifrit. Erica Elaine Grace was born in 1978 in Pennsylvania to Charlotte Gale and Gerald Mitchell Grace. As their only daughter, she enjoyed a comfortable and carefree childhood, thanks to her father's wealth from owning a construction company. Erica was intelligent, excelled in high school, and had a passion for basketball. She graduated in 1996 and attended the University of Mary Washington, where she became a basketball star and graduated with honors. However, teachers noted that she lacked confidence in her abilities and was often influenced by others. In 1998, she met Benjamin Adam Sifrit, who exploited her vulnerabilities. At first, it seemed like they were in love and got along well because they shared many common interests, especially in the field of sports. Benjamin, who was born in Esterville, Iowa, was an excellent swimmer and worked as a lifeguard. After graduating from college, he joined the Navy to train in the Navy SEAL Special Units, where he achieved great success. Benjamin and Erica make a great couple, with health and fitness being top priorities in their lives. Benjamin had a large tattoo on his chest adorned with symbols that only he understood. While this might have amused other women, Erica accepted it as a part of his identity. However, it is important to note that Benjamin was manipulative and had a negative personality, using intimidation and arrogance to get what he wanted. After a few weeks of dating, Benjamin proposed to Erica. To the shock of her family and friends, she said yes. This was surprising because Erica had never been impulsive or irresponsible. Accepting a marriage proposal so quickly was out of character for her. However, this time, passion overtook her decision. In 1998, Erica and Benjamin married privately without inviting anyone, not even their parents. Their honeymoon was brief, and soon after, Benjamin's career began to falter. In 2000, Benjamin faced court-martial for various offenses, including poor performance, absence without leave, wearing unauthorized insignia, and insubordination. According to the naval prosecutor, Benjamin had developed a complete disregard for authority. His military lawyer, the captain, noted that he had initially shown promise and received good evaluations, but that something had changed recently. He had lost interest in his service and career, often neglected his duties. Ultimately, Benjamin was discharged in disgrace due to his misconduct. In early 2001, 23-year-old Benjamin and Erica moved to Pennsylvania, close to Erica's hometown. This was the first time Erica's parents met Benjamin, and they were not pleased with him. They opened a scrapbook store named Memory Trail, where they primarily created photo albums for their clients. They then started selling some products online, including items they had stolen from stores and restaurants. Erica felt pressured to meet her husband's expectations and tried to demonstrate her capability by completing tasks that he assigned. However, to cope with her stress, she started drinking excessively and using banned substances. Meanwhile, Benjamin was searching for excitement in his life and sought out unusual experiences. He even bought snakes to keep as pets, causing concern among friends who noticed his strange behavior changes. On the weekend of May 25, 2002, Erica and Benjamin decided to go on a trip together. They went to a nightclub in Ocean City, Maryland, and rented a penthouse in a nearby apartment complex. At the same time, Martha Margene Jenny Crutchley, an insurance agent, and her banker boyfriend, Joshua Edward Ford, were also heading to the same nightclub. Martha and Joshua had been together for about a year and enjoyed spending weekends without a specific plan, simply wanting to eat, drink, and enjoy the night at the Ocean City Club. Erica and Benjamin unexpectedly met Martha and Joshua. They spent several hours together dancing, laughing, and singing. Just before the club closed, they invited Martha and Joshua to their rented penthouse for more drinks and fun. Martha and Joshua joyfully accepted the invitation, unaware that it would be their last night together. When Martha and Joshua failed to show up for work the following week, their colleagues grew concerned and called the police. On May 31st, early in the morning, an alarm went off at the Ocean City chain restaurant due to a theft. The police rushed to the scene to investigate. As they arrived, they saw a man and a woman leaving the restaurant with heavy bags. Upon detaining them, the officers discovered that the thieves were Benjamin and Erica. In addition to the stolen items, weapons were also found in Erica's bag. During a lengthy interrogation, Erica struggled to remain calm, crying and claiming she was experiencing a panic attack and needed her medication from her purse. When a police officer checked her bags, he found something unexpected: ID cards belonging to Joshua and Martha. They refused to explain how they obtained the documents. Meanwhile, a police patrol visited the penthouse rented by Erica and Benjamin. Upon searching the apartment, they found no signs of Joshua and Martha, except for photographs taken during their time together. As the police investigated the house, they became increasingly convinced that a crime had occurred there. Their search revealed several puzzling clues. They discovered blood spatter in both the master bedroom and the bathroom. Additionally, they learned that Erica and Benjamin had purchased paint and plaster, likely to conceal a bullet hole in the bathroom wall. Several bullet casings found on a table matched a weapon owned by Erica, and one of the casings had blood on it. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Joshua. During the interrogation, Benjamin chose to remain silent and requested a lawyer. In contrast, Erica began recounting the night's incident, asserting that her husband was the actual killer. She explained that after a night out at a nightclub, Joshua and Martha came to their apartment to continue the evening. At some point, Erica suspected that they had stolen her bag, leading Benjamin to attack them. According to Erica, Joshua was attacked first in the head, followed by Martha, who fled in fear to the bathroom and tried to hide under a small table. Benjamin then killed her as she was curled up in a ball. Erica claimed that Benjamin was responsible for the murders, while she only assisted him in disposing of the bodies. In her confession, she said the bodies were put in trash bags and dumped in a dumpster on the outskirts of Ocean City. The police searched local landfills and found only one of Martha's legs and Joshua's torso and arms. The rest of the bodies were never located, which meant the official cause of death could not be determined. The bullet was fired from a weapon, discovered with Joshua's remains, and was also found next to Erica. Both Erica and Benjamin were charged with first-degree murder for the deaths of Joshua and Martha. However, they both pleaded not guilty. The trial began on March 31, 2003, but due to the media attention, it was relocated outside of Worcester County, Maryland. Benjamin's trial was held in Rockville, and Erica's trial was held in Frederick. The public reacted negatively toward them, who had lived a seemingly luxurious life but turned out to be brutal murderers. According to court documents, Erica described her husband's obsession with power and control and his significant influence over her. However, Benjamin's lawyer contested this claim, arguing that Erica was frequently under the influence of alcohol, strong antidepressants, and diet pills, which may have affected her judgment and contributed to her actions. Benjamin listened quietly during the trial as Erica grew more distant from him. The defense attorney pointed out to the jury that the murder weapon was Erica's and presented ballistics results showing that the bullets from that weapon killed Joshua. Although the weapon was confiscated from Erica at the time of her arrest, proving that she was the one who pulled the trigger was difficult. The prosecution was represented by the Worcester prosecutor, who called a witness named Melissa Selling. She had spent the evening with Benjamin and Erica after her friend had taken her out on a date. At the trial, Melissa initially cried and seemed upset, but then she collected herself and testified. She explained that when she arrived at the date venue, Benjamin and Erica were already there. They were in a car with a flat tire, appeared drunk, and were acting strangely. Melissa recalled that Erica approached her and hugged her as if they were close friends, even though they had never met before. Benjamin had blood on his mouth, likely from biting his lip during the incident with the tire. The group soon went to the apartment they were renting. There, Melissa and her friend were shown Erica's pet snakes. Erica mentioned that she took medication for anxiety. When Erica suggested that they all relax in a hot tub and Melissa declined, Erica's mood shifted drastically. She began to scream and became angry, claiming she couldn't find her purse. Benjamin, who had been calm and kept his distance, suddenly jumped up and demanded that whoever took Erica's bag return it. He pulled a weapon from his belt, waved it angrily, and pointed to a bullet hole in the wall of the bathroom. He angrily warns them that they will suffer the same fate as a couple who previously attempted to steal Erica's bag, although the bag remains in its original location, untouched. According to Melissa, Benjamin and Erica often blamed and intimidated others. When Melissa and her friend attempted to leave in their car, Benjamin tried to take control of the vehicle. When asked in court if she believed Benjamin's claim that he had killed a couple, Melissa was uncertain. She stated that she had only thought Benjamin and Erica might be involved in the crimes but could not confirm it. The trial concluded, and after 2 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict on April 9, 2003. Benjamin Sifrit was convicted of second-degree murder for the death of Martha but was acquitted of any charges related to the murder of Joshua. This decision angered Joshua's brother, Mark, who expressed his disagreement with the verdict and wished for Benjamin to spend his life in prison. Additionally, Benjamin was found guilty of other charges related to his actions. The judge stated that the crime was committed purely for the thrill of murder. Benjamin killed without any good reason. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison for second-degree murder, along with first-degree assault, and an additional 5 years for being an accessory to another murder. Benjamin also pleaded guilty to second-degree burglary of a chain restaurant and to carrying a dangerous weapon during that break-in, which resulted in a 3-year prison sentence. Overall, his total sentence amounts to 38 years in prison. The judge noted that if it weren't for the excellent work of Benjamin's lawyers, he would have received a life sentence. However, he must adhere to the jury's decision. The judge expressed that this was one of the rare instances in his 20 years on the bench where he disagreed with the verdict. It is also indicated that Benjamin might be eligible for parole after serving half of his sentence. The prosecutor requested to be informed about any parole hearing so he could object, as he believes Benjamin should spend his life in prison. Erica's trial started 2 months later, on June 3, 2003. Her defense team argued that the weapon taken from her was registered to her husband, Benjamin, implying that he was the owner. However, this did not exclude the possibility that Erica had used the weapon herself. The district attorney claimed that Erica and Benjamin had lured Martha and Joshua to their apartment, where they took pleasure in killing for fun. Evidence showed that the bullets found in Joshua's remains were fired from the weapon that Benjamin had given to Erica. Additionally, it is likely that Erica killed Martha, as Erica had detailed knowledge of Martha's hiding place and her position before her death. Erica also collected trophies from her victims. A distinctive ring with a dragon that belonged to Joshua was found on her finger, and photographs later showed her wearing this ring around her neck while posing with her husband. Both appeared carefree, showing no remorse for their actions. Erica had also retained 4 bullet casings as mementos. In her defense, she claimed that Joshua and Martha had stolen her expensive handbag, which contained a valuable ring worth $100,000. However, Melissa testified that the handbag was never missing, it was still there. When Melissa and her friend visited Erica, they attempted to accuse her of theft using their usual tactics. The prosecutor argued that even if there was uncertainty about Erica's involvement in the murders of Joshua and Martha, it was clear she played a significant role in her husband's actions, making her equally culpable. Ultimately, the prosecution determined that Erica and Benjamin acted as a team, and the murders were the result of their combined efforts. During the trial, the defense aimed to show that Erica had been manipulated and exploited. They argued that she was merely a passive bystander and that Benjamin was solely responsible for the crimes. One of the defense lawyers accused the prosecution of twisting the truth to exaggerate Erica's culpability. In contrast, the prosecution portrayed Erica as a young woman who was easily influenced. They presented photographs taken 2 days after the murder in which Erica appeared fragile, weak, yet happy and relaxed. They explained that this was typical for someone dependent on antidepressants, alcohol, and banned substances. The defense and prosecution clashed intensely, but after lengthy arguments, Erica was charged with first-degree murder for the death of Joshua. During statements from Joshua's relatives, Erica maintained a stoic expression. It was only when her life was discussed that she broke down in tears. She attempted to apologize, stating that she deserved everything that was said to her, even the harsh words from her relatives, and added that she didn't deserve to be there asking for their forgiveness. Ultimately, Erica received a life sentence for the second-degree murder of Joshua and an additional 20 years for the murder of Martha. Following the sentencing, Benjamin filed for divorce, which was finalized in August. Both Erica and Benjamin submitted multiple appeals, all of which were denied. Benjamin became eligible for parole in 2021, but his request was turned down. His current release date is set for 2030, subject to change based on his behavior. Erica will be eligible for parole in 2024. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Sherry Beasley. On Saturday morning, June 29, 1991, 6-year-old Sherry Beasley woke up before the rest of her family. She put on a pink suit and a sweater and carefully left the bedroom she shared with her younger sister. The girl made breakfast for herself and her sister. Later, she asked her mother if she could go to the nearest store because she really wanted to buy some candy that was located nearby. Her young mother, Carrie Greenhill, had been feeling ill that day and sometimes allowed her daughter to leave the house to make small purchases. This time, Carrie even gave Sherry a list of groceries that needed to be purchased. At 1 p.m., Sherry got on her pink bike and set off on a journey that should have taken no more than half an hour. Another woman and her son went shopping at 1:20 p.m. as well. As they passed the store where Sherry was supposed to go, the woman noticed an abandoned pink bicycle. She recognized it right away because this was a small community where people lived in the area and everyone knew each other. Only Sherry had such a bicycle, which had been a Christmas present for the girl 6 months earlier. The neighbor had never seen Sherry's favorite gift thrown aside so carelessly. Looking around for the girl, she didn't see anyone, which seemed suspicious, but at first, she decided not to panic. Maybe the girl was somewhere nearby. As the woman was returning from the store, she noticed the bicycle without its owner again. This seemed more suspicious, especially since she was familiar with Sherry's mother. She stopped at Carrie's house and informed Carrie about the abandoned bicycle. Carrie became worried, so she immediately went to the indicated place, where she found the bicycle along with a bag containing cash and a grocery list. Some of the items were lying nearby, indicating that the girl had made it to the store and bought the necessary goods, but something had happened on her way back. Carrie glanced around the area but still couldn't find her daughter, so she went to the police. They took the case seriously and immediately began searching for Sherry. By the evening of the same day, news of her disappearance was dominating all the media. Many local residents came out to help and assisted in the search for her. All of this occurred in a quiet suburb of Melbourne called Rosebud, Australia, which at that time had a population of about 5,000 people. It is a place where many people know each other, and there is a very low crime rate. It is located on a peninsula, and rarely do you meet strangers. Many locals do not even lock their doors, and mothers let their children walk unsupervised. It was quiet here until Sherry went missing. Detectives talked to Sherry's mother and her partner. Carrie suspected Sherry's biological father, believing he might have kidnapped Sherry. They had long battled over custody of their daughter, and the man had taken the news of losing custody very badly. However, it was quickly confirmed that during that period, Sherry's father was fishing with friends in another region of the country, which was too far away for him to be involved in Sherry's disappearance. This theory was thus dismissed. Witnesses were found who saw Sherry meet with a little boy and talk to him. At that moment, a blue car drove by, but further developments happened without any witnesses. Shane admitted that he had met Sherry in the very location where the bicycle was found. He confirmed that suddenly, an unknown man drove up to the children, grabbed Sherry, and drove away. The man acted so quickly that Shane didn't even have time to react. Unfortunately, Shane didn't know much about car models and brands. He could only describe it as blue and lacking rear doors, likely a sedan. The police carefully examined the area where Sherry had disappeared and discovered tire tracks that confirmed Shane's story. The investigators continued their work and managed to find several witnesses who saw a similar-looking car with a driver described as a man between 30 and 40 years of age. Unfortunately, that description was also quite vague. Notably, a child was sitting in the passenger seat, and the girl appeared to be crying. Although they were unable to obtain a detailed description of the man, the police now knew the exact make of the kidnapper's car, a blue Toyota Corolla. It was a fairly popular model at that time, and in the area, there were about 700 similar cars registered, so the scale of the work only increased. A witness named Margaret Hobbs approached the site. She is a former law enforcement officer who has spent recent decades conducting rehabilitation therapy for assault-prone criminals in a private setting. Margaret, unsure of where her efforts to help society would lead her, worked as a probation officer for many years. After her dismissal, she became a psychotherapist and organized her own private practice, specializing in therapy with men who had committed abuse crimes. Margaret encountered criminals daily, usually those convicted of minor offenses. In November of 1984, 47-year-old Robert Arthur Selby Lowe was sent to see a specialist for the first time, charged with exposing himself to schoolgirls in a shopping mall and making inappropriate comments. He had a previous conviction for theft. From the start, Margaret noticed that the man was very different from the type of people she usually worked with. He was very polite, looked decent, neat, wore glasses, and had a British accent. For many years, he had worked as a church elder, was a Sunday school teacher, and a sports coach for children. No matter how decent he looked, Margaret figured him out. Despite his respectable appearance, something about him was alarming. After the trial, he received a year of correctional labor for exhibitionism, and then he began to regularly visit Margaret for therapy sessions. Gradually, she uncovered more and more criminal episodes from his past, starting from the time he lived in his homeland, Great Britain. Then, in search of a better life, he moved to New Zealand and later went to Australia. In 1967, he said that he regularly demonstrated himself and derived pleasure from it, especially if the victims were minors. Margaret noticed that he took pride in his dubious past. Margaret even managed to gain his trust. By April 1990, he came to her office and admitted to an accusation of attempted kidnapping of a minor. Robert again insisted that he had done nothing wrong. However, he mentioned that an alarming incident had indeed occurred in the suburbs where he worked at that time. Margaret was already good at getting the truth out of him, and gradually she managed to find out what had happened. He met with schoolgirls with whom he had a stagnant conversation about his dream pony. From their dialogue, it became clear that he could very well have had malicious intent. The next time Robert came, about a month later, he said that he had tried to talk to a 12-year-old girl, but a policeman intervened in their conversation. Now he had a new charge. Two girls, aged 8 and 10, were standing on the railway platform when Robert approached them and started an indecent conversation, attempting to persuade them toward intimacy. All this was overheard by a patrolman standing nearby, whom Robert did not notice. When the policeman approached, Robert tried to escape and had to be detained, thrown to the ground. Before he turned to Margaret, he asked her for help. Margaret refused to write him a characterization that could be used for defense in court because she was sure of his guilt. However, he threatened to involve the girls so that they would testify against him in court, which could become another trauma for them. It became obvious that Robert felt no remorse for what had happened. He was only trying to save himself, and his crimes were only becoming more dangerous. Margaret asked him not to come to therapy anymore. Previously, she believed she was helping him. However, she now realized that it was only getting worse. He was deriving perverted pleasure from their time together. Robert was angry about this and refused to quit therapy, but Margaret insisted he leave. As a result, he flared up and slammed the door. Later, Margaret agreed to write a characterization, but stated the truth within it. Robert's lawyer decided not to use this document in court, believing it would only harm his client. By November 1990, Robert was found guilty of stalking children, but the punishment turned out to be ridiculous. It was limited to a fine of $100. Knowing this, Margaret was alarmed. She now understood that he could get away with it. Fortunately for her, Robert did not visit Margaret for some time, as she had asked. Margaret was once again driving to her office when the first kidnapping in the Rosebud occurred. A search operation was underway, and by this time, authorities knew that the probable kidnapper was a man about 50 years old who could drive a blue Toyota Corolla. As soon as Margaret heard about it, she immediately thought of Robert Lowe. However, Margaret knew that his wife owned the house in the area where Sherry had gone missing. Of course, this was not enough ground to accuse him of anything, so Margaret dismissed the suspicion and continued her usual life. However, the thought that her former client could be involved in all this did not leave her mind. Margaret continued to monitor the search, which was not progressing, but locals were worried that Sherry had become a victim of an unknown serial killer, whom the media had dubbed Mr. Cruel. As it turned out, this man was credited with numerous crimes in the suburbs of Melbourne in the late 80s and early 90s. He was considered the main suspect in the kidnapping of 13-year-old Carmine Chain, who was abducted from her home about 3 months before Sherry Beasley's disappearance. Her body, with gunshot wounds, was found a year later in Edgar's Creek. Despite a long break, Robert Lowe came to Margaret again. Margaret's son-in-law had organized a law firm on the floor below her office, but he was not there, so Robert decided to talk to her. This time, the conversation was again about the crime of which he was accused. Naturally, according to him, the Supreme Court's decision was unfounded. Margaret immediately noticed that Robert had changed a lot. He looked unkempt and was rude to her. This atypical behavior only increased her suspicions about him. She refused to engage further and then went downstairs to see what kind of car Robert had arrived in. It turned out that he had used a blue Toyota Corolla without rear doors, just as described in the suspect's profile for the kidnapping. Margaret realized that he could indeed be involved in the disappearance of Sherry and contacted the police. It turned out that the police had recently reached his name on the list of cars and were checking him out. Robert matched the description of Sherry's kidnapper quite well in terms of age, appearance, and the make of the car. It was also discovered that Robert had a criminal past concerning harassment of minors, which looked especially suspicious. Then detectives had a conversation with him. Robert appeared too nervous, reluctantly answered questions, but quickly remembered what he did on the day of Sherry's kidnapping. His answers seemed dubious. Now, Margaret was sure of his involvement. The police arrived at Robert's house and took his car away for forensic examination. Robert himself was arrested and taken in for questioning. He was allowed to make one phone call and immediately reached out to Margaret, asking her to recommend the best lawyer she knew. Margaret advised him to stay with the lawyer who had already handled his previous cases. Then, Robert was released due to insufficient evidence. A month later, he came to work looking disheveled and sloppy as usual. According to him, detectives had interrogated him for more than 4 hours, but he refused to provide fingerprints and DNA samples. Without irrefutable evidence against him, the detectives could not proceed without his voluntary permission. However, suspicions against Robert were not unfounded. At the time of Sherry's disappearance, he provided an alibi that no one could confirm. During his communication with the detectives, Robert changed his story several times, which further strengthened the suspicion against him. When they tried to check the alibi, the time periods Robert indicated did not match the statements of witnesses, including his friend, employer, and wife. Even Robert's wife began to notice oddities in his behavior that day. Robert claimed he was not in that area, but several people saw him there. He returned home only in the evening, quickly changed his clothes, and threw his things in the washing machine, which he had never done before. He thoroughly washed his car. Curiously, he now lived in a country house not far from the place of Sherry's abduction. From the first meeting with Margaret, he insisted that he was innocent of Sherry's kidnapping and was sure that the police wouldn't find any evidence against him, allowing him to start a new life. 3 months after Sherry's disappearance, on September 24, 1991, 2 girls were riding horses along a country road about 10 kilometers from Rosebud. They smelled something unpleasant and went to investigate. Inside, the girls saw decomposed remains, but initially mistook them for a kangaroo. The next day, when they passed by again, they realized that scavenger animals had pulled the bones into the open. They then understood that what they saw was not an animal, but rather the remains of a small person who was wearing a pink tracksuit, matching the items of clothing that Sherry Beasley had been described as wearing. The girls went to the police and reported their frightening find. Forensic examination identified the remains as belonging to the missing 6-year-old girl, Sherry. During this period, Robert Lowe became a regular customer of Margaret. When she heard that the child's body had been found, she spoke to him about it. He clearly became nervous and inappropriately added that he had no idea where the body could have been found, even though Margaret did not ask him about it. She noticed that her client's behavior became increasingly erratic with each meeting, he more nervous each time. During this period, Margaret became convinced that Robert was responsible for the crime. It felt like a game of cat and mouse. Margaret knew that Robert would deny his guilt to the last. However, he liked to talk about what happened, and gradually, he revealed more and more details that he could not have known. Robert's house was searched. He was brought in for questioning several times, during which the suspect insisted that he was not guilty and had an alibi. Robert was under surveillance. It was found that he often visited public places where he watched girls and satisfied himself. Newspaper clippings and articles related to the kidnappings of Carmine Chain and other girls were found in his house. He did not just collect them but also made strange notes. All of this resembled some kind of madness, which was even confirmed by his wife. According to her, he talked about it so often while they were still living together that she was forced to ask him to stop. Now, she was determined to get a divorce. Finally, 2 detectives visited Margaret Hobbs and reported that they were investigating Robert's case, his probable involvement in the murder of Sherry Beasley. At that time, they still had no evidence. Additionally, Margaret did not want to violate medical ethics and disclose details of her therapy sessions with Robert. However, she began to doubt, realizing that he bore a striking resemblance to the real criminal. The detectives decided to act discreetly and secretly from Margaret. They installed a small microphone above the office, allowing them to listen to all of Robert Lowe's visits. Investigators were in the next building, eavesdropping on his revelations. One time Robert came in for therapy, he mentioned that he might know where the body was found, as one day he and his wife were walking there. Then, Margaret asked him to point to the location on a map. A stroke marked the location. Margaret checked and found that this mark precisely coincided with where the body of Sherry had been discovered. It seemed that this could not have been a mere coincidence. During the next visit, Robert entered the office and suddenly began to talk about how the child's body might have been eaten by insect larvae. This struck Margaret as inappropriate and alarming. She saw a small foreign object. Margaret quickly realized it was a larva. In anger, Margaret demanded he leave the office. Robert complied, leaving behind the plastic bag with which he had come. When Margaret looked inside, she found it was filled with larvae. By March 1992, Robert came to see Margaret again. At their meeting, he stated that he was inclined to block memories of the terrible deeds he had committed, to the extent that he truly could not remember anything. Margaret asked if this could be connected with the death of Sherry Beasley. He admitted that it indeed could be the case. However, he was more worried about the divorce, which he was struggling with. Robert continued to talk but did not say anything specific until April 1, 1992, when he finally told Margaret that he wanted to tell the truth. She agreed to help, after which he began his story. Robert said, on June 29, 1991, he was driving along the road when he noticed 2 children arguing on the street. It was Sherry and her friend, Shane. He stopped and offered Sherry a ride to avoid the conflict. She agreed, sat in the passenger seat, and buckled up. As he drove away, Sherry suddenly began to choke. She looked scared and panicked. By the time Robert stopped, the girl had stopped breathing. He checked her pulse and realized that she had died. His first thought was to dig a grave to dispose of the body. However, he didn't have a shovel. Robert wanted to take Margaret to where he left Sherry's body. Margaret was horrified but determined to obtain a complete confession, so she agreed but requested a couple of hours to prepare and settle some business. When Robert Lowe made his confession, the police were informed. Margaret was deeply concerned about the implications for professional ethics, but she understood that she was doing the right thing. A trip with the main suspect was scheduled for the same day, and the police offered to assist in catching a dangerous killer. They were going to accompany Margaret along with the criminal, but secretly, in order to get a confession without scaring him off. Margaret was given a special device with a panic button that she was supposed to press if she suddenly felt in danger. In addition, a hidden listening device was installed in the car. On the evening of the same day, Robert and Margaret headed to Rosebud. First, Robert decided to stop where a small pink bicycle had been found. He pointed out exactly where they had arrived, which was marked with a yellow ribbon tied to a tree that someone had left in memory of Sherry. Then they walked to the drain pipe where the body was found. Here, mourners had left flowers, organizing a semblance of a memorial. Robert told Margaret the story of Sherry Beasley, wiped his tears with his sleeve, prayed for his salvation, and offered Margaret to come in for a cup of tea, but she refused, left. Margaret felt unwell and stopped a couple of 100 meters away, where she threw up from the horror she experienced. After this, she expressed a desire to cooperate even more closely with the police to catch this dangerous man. Detectives collected all the necessary evidence, and by May 1993, Robert Lowe was arrested in the suburbs of Melbourne. He refused to cooperate and said that he was as pure as Jesus Christ. Therefore, detectives had to talk to his lawyer. Lowe's concept of guilt was useless because his confession had been recorded when he was brought to court. He was met by a crowd of journalists and angry members of the local community, including Sherry's mother. She wanted to pounce on him, but others held her back. It was believed that Robert was lying, claiming that Sherry had voluntarily gotten into the car. This contradicted the words of Shane's friend, who insisted that they had not quarreled and that the man had simply dragged Sherry into the car by force. Additionally, they did not believe that she had accidentally suffocated herself during a panic attack. Unfortunately, Sherry's body was found too late, making it difficult to establish the exact circumstances. Although he was in prison, new details of the crime emerged thanks to the testimony of a cellmate. However, these details needed to be checked and confirmed before the jury. His story about the killer was questioned, Robert, so the cellmate was offered to wear a wiretap to elicit more information. A legend was invented, according to which the cellmate had a good lawyer who could help Robert, but to do so, he needed to know exactly what happened. This story looked plausible, and the cellmate managed to convince him. Robert told a new, more convincing version of events, which is now considered final. He reported that he had watched Sherry for quite a long time and discovered that the little girl periodically went shopping alone. He kidnapped her, taking advantage of this, and brutally abused her. After that, he strangled her with his hands. Robert disposed of the body by throwing it down the drain and discarded the clothes because they had too many traces of his DNA on them. The trial of Robert Arthur Selby Lowe began in October 1994, with Margaret Hobbs becoming the prosecution's star witness and testifying for 4 days. His cellmate expressed gratitude to the detectives who allowed him to put a dangerous child killer behind bars. The jury deliberated for 5 hours and found Robert guilty of kidnapping and murdering Sherry Beasley. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for first-degree murder and an additional 15 years for kidnapping. Margaret's cooperation with the police was considered a controversial decision. People were divided into 2 camps. Some regarded her as virtuous for allowing a dangerous criminal to be put behind bars, while others accused her of failing to maintain the confidentiality of her client, which appeared unprofessional. In 1997, Robert appealed, arguing that Margaret should not have been a witness in the case, but this appeal was rejected. This story left an indelible mark on Margaret's soul, and she began writing a book. In 1996, she and her husband died in a car accident. The work on this book was completed by journalist and writer Andrew Rule. In 2021, Robert Arthur Selby Lowe, 84, died at Hopkins Correctional Center near Ararat in Western Victoria. The tragic fate of Sherry Beasley serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of innocence and the hidden dangers that can lurk even in the quietest of communities. What began as a simple errand on a peaceful Saturday morning spiraled into a nightmare that shattered the lives of her family and left an indelible scar on Rosebud. A frightening call received to 911 reported a terrible crime that had occurred in the Eckerd family living in the state of Florida, United States. The love between 2 brothers was destroyed overnight due to jealousy over loving the same girl. Sean Paul Eckerd was born on October 12, 1990, in the small town located in San Diego County, California. His parents were Donna and Samuel Eckerd. He also had a brother, Stanley Elias Eckerd, who was 2 years older than Sean. Donna and Samuel had a total of 6 other children from previous relationships, but the media only mentioned the names of Jennifer. These children lived separately from the family on the other coast of the USA, in Florida. The Eckerd family settled in San Diego in a rented house, where Sean and Stanley spent their childhood. The boys grew up in love and care. It seemed their upbringing was calm and completely normal. Sean had charisma from child and was always very generous. With these qualities, he managed to win people over in their environment, practically making them fall in love with him. For Donna, in particular, Sean became a breath of fresh air in the family, and perhaps it was because of this that her affection for him was so noticeable. Due to the busy schedules of their parents, especially their mother, who was involved in work and church activities, Sean and Stanley were often left alone at home. The relationship between the two brothers was generally harmonious, although it was naturally not without episodes of quarrels, as often happens in family relationships. For example, it was common for Stanley, as the older brother, to make fun of Sean. Disagreements and disputes would often arise from this. As Sean grew up, he displayed a sociable and cheerful character, which contrasted with the calm demeanor of his parents. The Eckerd family did not communicate much with their neighbors and rarely made acquaintances. However, as Sean matured, everything changed. He managed to establish good relationships with everyone around him. At some point, this ability helped him become friends with their neighbor, Mary, who was from Torrance, located in Los Angeles County. She was a single mother of 2 children. Mary loved animals. She kept many different animals at her house, including horses, chickens, and sheep. The animals caught Sean's attention, leading him to visit her house frequently to help care for them. Sean began to spend more and more time at Mary's house, playing with her family, and he even became friends with her children. Over time, her house became a second home for Sean, especially during the times when his parents were not present or communicating much with him. Mary spoiled him and especially enjoyed having him around. At some point, he seemed to have become her child. Sean, Mary, and her children often went for walks to the observation decks of San Diego, just to admire the valley, which was one of Sean's favorite activities. However, in 2005, when Sean was 15 years old and had finished high school, he learned that the house where his family lived would be sold. When Sean found out that the house they were renting was going to be sold, he was heartbroken. He didn't want to move at all. The family had tried to find a place to rent in the area, but they couldn't find anything that fit their budget. His grandmother lived in Florida, and she had a house that she said they could live in if they moved there. So the family decided to move. Sean asked if he could stay with Mary, but his parents loved him so much they wanted him to stay with them. Mary remembers him crying when he arrived on the day he had to leave. The move occurred in August 2005. The family now lived in Spring Hill, Florida, in a house with a huge garden in the backyard. Both brothers enrolled in the local high school. Sean and Stanley adapted easily to the new environment, making friends both with their neighbors and classmates. Among their new friends, Samantha, a local teenage girl who quickly became friends with the brothers. Despite their busy new lives, Sean still missed Mary and her family. They kept in touch daily, calling each other to arrange meetings, leading Sean to dream that immediately after finishing school, he would return to California and continue living with them. In May 2006, Stanley revealed some news to their parents that left them utterly amazed. He announced that he was going to drop out of school. Stanley said that he wanted to devote more time to his hobby of studying martial arts and collecting swords. However, in reality, his desire to drop out was also influenced by the bad company he had fallen into. These unfavorable connections eventually led to his arrest in 2007 on charges of committing serious crimes related to fraud. However, later on, Stanley managed to get away with it. One of the neighbors knew Stanley, described him as a cheerful guy but called him a liar and a thief with obsessive thoughts, stating that he lied only to feel better. One of the Eckerd children described Stanley as a talented musician with a high intellect. Perhaps because of his rich vocabulary, the other kids considered him arrogant because they simply did not understand him. She said that people with high IQs often seem a little strange to others. She insisted that her brother was a good person. At the end of the same summer, Sean also approached their parents with troubling news, announcing his desire to drop out of school. Samuel and Donna feared a similar outcome, believing that Sean could follow the same crooked path as his older brother. However, Sean was not inclined to get into trouble. Instead, he soon got a job and joined the service team at a restaurant chain. Unfortunately, Sean often fell ill, which drove him to despair. He was forced to miss shifts at work, and soon he had to quit his job. Eventually, it turned out that he was suffering from encephalitis. Then, Sean even fell into a coma that lasted for 40 days. As his sister recounted, the doctors who treated him in Tampa said he had white lesions on his brain and considered his survival unlikely. His parents did not want to give up and insisted that Sean might wake up. Fortunately for them, it happened. When Sean finally awoke, he was in a deplorable state. He had lost about 20 kilograms and was greatly weakened. He had to undergo long-term therapy. During this difficult process, the Eckerd family was by his side. Donna, Samuel, and Stanley gave him unwavering support. Thanks in many ways to their efforts, Sean managed to fully rehabilitate and regain his health. Undoubtedly, such problems with their son affected Donna deeply. She experienced so much stress and suffering that she eventually developed heart problems. Sean, after going through this ordeal, wanted to return to school. Some of his friends and family members noted that he seemed to have begun to treat life more sensibly and appreciated every moment. Being in this mental state, in the summer of 2009, Sean decided that he was ready to go to California and reunite with Mary, his second family. He was greeted with great joy, which led Sean to tell Mary about his aspirations and plans for the future. Sean also shared his dream of becoming a physical therapist but noted that he would need money to make his dream come true. Sean and Mary were determined to figure it out, so they started looking for loans and grants. By this time, Sean took for granted that the right thing to do was to stick to his original plan of moving to California, and he told his mother about it. However, she felt that now was not the best time to let her son go, especially after all the suffering he had endured. Donna believed he would not be able to get proper medical care there. That with his parents, he had everything he needed to live, so she asked Sean to stay. It was an unpleasant decision for Sean, but he listened to his mother. Before parting from Mary, he promised them that he would return the following summer. At the same time in Florida, both brothers gradually began to warm up to Samantha, their mutual new friend. In early May 2010, Stanley and Sean exchanged text messages with her. However, it was Stanley who eventually took the initiative and asked her out. Samantha happily accepted, and they spent a wonderful evening together. At the end of the evening, they drove back together, and just before saying goodbye, they kissed. Stanley took this as a sign that they were now in a relationship and informed everyone he knew about it. However, it turned out that this was not the case. After their date, Samantha realized that she liked his brother Sean, and after a few days, she began dating Sean. It should be noted that both Sean and Samantha informed Stanley about their relationship. For Stanley, this news was shocking, and of course, the relationship between the brothers deteriorated sharply. It got to the point where they were arguing emotionally even in front of their parents. Because of this, Samantha and Sean pretended to break off their relationship, started keeping it a secret. However, this led to false hope for Stanley. Blinded by jealousy, Stanley warned Samantha not to trust Sean, claiming that Sean only wanted to play with her feelings. On June 17, 2010, while Sean and Stanley were helping their brother, Sean confessed that his relationship with Samantha was ongoing and that his intentions were serious. Stanley pretended that this news did not matter to him. However, deep down, he felt an intensely strong anger flare up inside him. The next day, without considering what Stanley might think or do, Sean made plans for a date with Samantha. Early Saturday morning, June 19, 2010, they said their goodbyes and went home. Sean immediately returned to his room and locked the door, planning to rest. However, Stanley had completely different plans. He quietly crept up to the door and opened it, bringing a rope with him. At first, the brothers just started arguing, But very soon their conversation escalated into a loud argument about courting Samantha. Suddenly, they attacked each other, and the fight took an unusual turn when Stanley threw a rope around Sean's neck. According to a later account, Stanley stated that at some point, they just fell to the floor, and Sean received a fatal blow to the neck. In horror, Stanley approached him and suddenly felt that the body of his younger brother was slowly freezing. Eventually, Sean's heart stopped, and he breathed his last in Stanley's arms. In a state of shock, Stanley began to deny what was happening. He placed Sean's body on the bed and started questioning how they had come to this tragic outcome. At that moment, Stanley could think of nothing better than to dig a grave in their garden with his own hands. Once he completed this task, he pulled his brother's body out of the window and lowered it into the hole. At the moment he began to bury Sean, their mother, Donna, woke up and strange muffled sounds outside the house attracted her attention. Noticing her son, she asked what he was doing. Stanley replied that he was simply burying some of Samantha's things because he didn't want them to continue reminding him of her. Donna was satisfied with this answer and left, allowing Stanley to continue with his terrible plan. He successfully completed the burial and devised a plan. He intended to dig up and bring Sean's body away in 2 weeks when his parents left home. Afterward, Stanley went to Sean's room and took Sean's phone to message Samantha while impersonating him. He claimed that Sean wanted to break off the relationship. Around 9:30 a.m., when Samantha woke up and saw these messages, she didn't know what to think or feel. Considering the previous evening, such words from Sean seemed absurd. Shortly after that, Stanley texted Samantha from Stanley's phone and asked her to call him back. He tried to convince her that Sean had packed his things and left for California. Before ending the conversation, Stanley added that things were calmer at home now. That same day, Samantha visited the Eckert house to collect some of her belongings. Offering to give her a lift, Stanley confessed that he still loved her and expressed hope that with Sean's departure, they could try to start anew. On Sunday, June 20th, 2010, Donna celebrated her birthday, coinciding with her father's celebration. Deciding not to miss the opportunity, they organized a party to celebrate both occasions. However, without Sean, it felt as though they could not enjoy the day. They tried calling him many times, but to no avail. At some point, Sean finally responded, but only through a text message. This was completely uncharacteristic of him, as he had never ignored his parents' calls before, prompting them to realize that something was wrong and fear that something terrible had happened to their son. On June 21st, 2010, Jennifer went to her parents' house to check for any news about Sean's whereabouts. During a conversation between Jennifer and Donna, Donna mentioned the strange pit that Stanley had dug the day before. "I don't quite understand, will this make any sense?" Jennifer asked. She then urged their father to inspect the hole. As soon as they began digging, he fell onto his son's arms and legs. Panicking, he screamed in horror and quickly pieced together the grim reality. Jennifer dialed emergency services, but her voice was so broken that the dispatcher struggled to understand the situation. Meanwhile, Samuel was screaming non-stop, making it difficult for the dispatcher to grasp what was happening. At this time, Donna ran to Stanley's room to find out what had happened. She found her son sitting on the floor, sobbing and asking for forgiveness while claiming it was an accident. Meanwhile, Jennifer begged emergency services to send the police, fearing that Stanley might attack the rest of the family. After a harrowing 7-minute call, the police finally arrived at the Eckert house. There, they found Samuel kneeling in front of the hole, digging with his hands and trying to pull Sean's body out by his arms. An officer ordered him to stop, but he did not comply. The police had to forcibly lead the grieving father away. A few minutes later, Donna emerged from the room with Stanley. He was arrested on the scene and taken for questioning. During his interrogation, Stanley changed his account of events several times. Initially, he claimed that his brother was addicted to illegal substances and deep in debt. Then, one day, when he went into his room, he saw Sean attempting to end one's own life. Stanley asserted that he tried to stop Sean from what he had planned, but his efforts were in vain. He tried to convince the police that he hid his brother's body because he wanted to spare his mother the enormous pain of loss. After 2 hours of interrogation, under pressure from the police, Stanley finally admitted what truly happened and disclosed that the reason for the quarrel was Samantha, at 10:30 p.m. on the same Monday. Stanley was taken to Hernando County Jail to be held without bail on a charge of second-degree murder. 2 days later, the forensic experts performed an autopsy on Sean's body and presented the forensic analysis results to the court. The report stated that Sean had visible bruises in the muscles under the skin of his neck, which clearly indicated that the area had been compressed, making breathing difficult. The examination concluded that death was caused by traumatic brain injury and neck trauma. To determine whether the case warranted first or second-degree charges, Deputy State's Attorney began a thorough review of the case's circumstances. A first-degree charge would mean that Stanley could face the death penalty. On February 25, 2011, the first hearing was held before District Judge. In the second row of the courtroom were Samuel and Donna, who were clearly shocked by what was happening. Although prosecutor insisted on a first-degree charge, he confirmed that he would not seek the death penalty. Immediately after Judge announced that the hearing would be adjourned, Stanley, pale and handcuffed, made a calming gesture toward his parents. They were both sobbing. In the end, Stanley was charged with first-degree murder, but he was offered a plea deal. If he pleaded guilty, he would spend no more than 20 years in prison. To everyone's surprise, Stanley chose to stand trial, essentially giving up the opportunity to go free. The trial began on April 9, 2013. The defense was led by attorney Alan Fanter, while prosecutor Pete Magrino remained in charge of the prosecution. The main goal of the prosecution was to convince the jury that the defendant had carefully planned the crime. During the discussion of arguments, prosecutor Pete addressed Stanley directly. However, Stanley maintained remarkable composure and did not admit to what Pete was trying to elicit. The prosecutor then announced to everyone present that the motive for the crime was Stanley's jealousy and that everything pointed to premeditated actions on his part. In response, attorney Allen argued that it was a spontaneous fight that led to a tragic accident. He emphasized that despite Stanley's obviously unsuccessful attempt to cover up the evidence of the crime, he was motivated by good intentions, trying to protect his mother. Allen appealed to the jury not to let Stanley's attempt to cover up the crime cloud the true essence of the events. After hearing the testimonies, the jury, consisting of 9 women and 3 men, deliberated for 2 hours on April 12, 2013, and concluded that the crime was not premeditated. Consequently, they found Stanley guilty of second-degree murder. Despite efforts by Donna and Samuel to obtain a new trial, they were not granted this opportunity. During the final hearing held a month later, on May 13, 2013, emotions overwhelmed both parents. Through tears, they begged Judge to reconsider the case, with Donna recounting the defense arguments. The judge tried to calm them down, noting that no parent should have to endure what they were experiencing. However, he concluded that the crime was too serious and the perpetrator had to be punished. Therefore, Judge sentenced Stanley to 50 years in prison without possibility of parole. In turn, Stanley publicly apologized to his family and confessed to his actions. He admitted that he would never be able to atone for his guilt. From California, Mary watched the trial with a broken heart. Looking at the valleys of San Diego, she remembered the wonderful time spent together with Sean and felt profound sadness, realizing how lucky she had been to meet such a remarkable man. The tragic saga of the Eckerd family serves as a haunting reminder of how jealousy and unchecked emotions can shatter familial bonds and lead to irreversible consequences. Sean Paul Eckerd's vibrant life, marked by charisma and dreams of a brighter future, was cut short by his brother Stanley's act of violence, leaving a community in shock and a family in perpetual grief. The courtroom's verdict, while delivering justice, could not mend the wounds inflicted on Donna, Samuel, and their loved ones. They almost lost both of their sons. Jennifer grew up in Oklahoma, raised by her mother, and had a brother named David. Although from a humble background, Jennifer had a good childhood. She completed high school and went on to study business at National University. Her friends described her as a very sweet woman. One thing that was dear to Jennifer was her faith. Whenever she thought about marriage, the first quality she wanted in a husband was his attachment to religion. Jennifer met 25-year-old Michael Blagg at a party. He was a helicopter pilot in the U.S. Navy and was stationed in San Diego at that time. Michael had grown up in a family that moved frequently because his father was a colonel in the Air Force. He was an incredibly well-behaved child, extremely intelligent, and hardworking. He consistently earning good grades, excelling in co-curricular activities. Michael was so bright that he got into the governor's honor program and attended Georgia Tech to study nuclear engineering. To afford college and complete his higher studies, he enlisted in the Navy. Jennifer was quickly drawn to him because he seemed to value faith as she did. The two began meeting frequently. Michael appeared to be a great family man in Jennifer's eyes, someone who would provide for her and their future children. Jennifer and Michael got married in 1991. While it was Jennifer's first marriage, Michael had been married before. However, that marriage only lasted a year before he parted ways with his first wife. After some time, Michael retired from the Navy and began a career as an engineer. The Blagg family moved to Simpsonville, South Carolina. They welcomed a baby girl named Abby. Jennifer loved living in Simpsonville. The family made new friends through their church, and Jennifer started teaching a women's Bible study group. Michael also became a co-teacher at the Bible school. Jennifer had found a strong, take-charge person in Michael. He was very caring, protective of her. However, according to Jennifer's friends, her behavior suggested otherwise. Sometimes, she becomes anxious and often panics when Michael is about to come home. Jennifer always focused on keeping the house in perfect condition so that Michael could have a comfortable environment when he returned from work. Despite all this, the Blagg family seemed happy. Things took a complete turn when Michael found a new job as operations manager at a manufacturing plant in Grand Junction, Colorado. Jennifer did not want to leave her happy routine in Simpsonville, but she felt compelled to be a dutiful wife to Michael. The family moved to Grand Junction in 2001, and Jennifer started to appear unhappy. It was evident that something was wrong in her personal life. At the time of the move, Jennifer was 34 years old, and Abby was just 6. Just a few months after moving to their new home, an incident occurred that shocked the entire community in Grand Junction. On November 13, 2001, Michael left for work early in the morning. Every day, he would leave early and return in the evening. Due to his protective nature, he would call Jennifer multiple times throughout the day to check if she and their daughter Abby were okay. However, when he called home after arriving at the office, no one picked up the phone. This was unusual since Jennifer always answered his calls. After waiting some time for her to call back, he tried again, but still, no one answered. Concerned for the safety of Jennifer and Abby, Michael left a voicemail. "Hope everything's okay." When there was still no response or news of Jennifer and Abby after several hours, Michael decided to leave the office early and check on his family. As soon as he arrived home, he called 911 and reported that both his wife and daughter were missing. He also informed the operator that there was blood all over the master bedroom of their house. Law enforcement authorities rushed to Michael's home. When police officers entered the bedroom, they found a significant amount of blood. Additionally, the jewelry box was tipped upside down, and Jennifer's purse was dumped on the floor with its contents scattered throughout the room. Initially believed to be a kidnapping case, the officers quickly changed their minds due to the volume of blood present. Kidnappings typically do not leave behind such a large amount of blood at the crime scene. Authorities recognized that there was another aspect to this story. Furthermore, the placement of the blood was peculiar. It was only on the bed, while the walls in the hallway were absolutely clean, with no drag marks in the house. While the investigation team was searching for a murderer, Michael appeared to believe that his wife and daughter had been kidnapped and were still alive. He even requested the public's help in locating his family and posted a reward of $3,000 for anyone who provided information about Jennifer and Abby. The Colorado River became the focal point of the investigation, as the police believed the victims' bodies might have been dumped in the area. While the investigators were searching the areas near the Colorado River, forensic experts were working inside the Blagg home to find any clues that might lead the authorities to Jennifer and Abby. According to people in the neighborhood, the last they had seen of the victims alive was a day earlier, when Jennifer came back home after picking up Abby from school. As forensic experts examined different parts of the house, they found blood in the family van. This was the point when Michael turned from a grieving husband and father to a suspect in a double homicide case. When he was interviewed, he claimed he didn't know anything about where Jennifer and Abby had gone. He said that he hadn't got a clue who would have any malice in their heart against anyone in their family and that Abby was a wonderful girl. Michael provided investigators with a timeline leading up to the incident. He stated that the night before his family went missing, Abby went to bed at her usual time of 7 p.m., while he and Jennifer stayed up late, as was their custom. Around 8 p.m., Jennifer received a phone call from a friend who invited her to lunch the following day. She accepted and planned to meet her friend before going to bed with Michael around 10 p.m. On the day of the incident, November 13, 2001, Michael woke up at approximately 5:30 a.m. to go to work. He noted that both Jennifer and Abby were still asleep since they typically woke up around 6:30 a.m. Michael usually called Jennifer several times during the day to check on her, and he did the same on November 13th. However, she did not answer his calls. At first, he did not think much of it, but after a few hours, he became concerned and returned home, only to find that both his wife and daughter were missing. It was evident to someone that November 13th would be an unusual day for Jennifer and Abby, as Abby's school received a call on November 12th. The caller informed the school administration that Abby would not be attending classes the next day. While the school did not know who made the call, they recorded that Abby was expected to be absent on November 13th. In addition to the previously mentioned voice notes, more were discovered. One of them included the message in which the sender greeted his bride and expressed hope that she was out enjoying herself and doing exciting things. As the investigation expanded, the officers began to strongly suspect that Michael had something to do with the disappearance of Jennifer and Abby. Michael, on the other hand, constantly denied this, even criticized the police for considering him a suspect in the case. He told the press that it bothered him to be looked into, despite the fact that he had lost his wife and daughter. A month after Jennifer and Abby's disappearance, Michael moved out of the family home, stating it was too hard to stay in the house where he lost them. While investigators did their job, Michael kept making frequent appearances in the media, saying he believed this was a case of burglary gone wrong. Michael even bought Christmas presents for Jennifer and Abby, told everyone he hoped they would be home soon to open them. People were sympathetic towards Michael because he wasn't only grieving the loss of his family, he was also a suspect in their possible murder. However, police and some of Jennifer's friends believed Michael had something to do with his wife and daughter's disappearance. As time passed, the suspicion grew stronger due to new evidence and witness testimonies, yet Michael maintained his innocence. Initially, he denied having any fight with Jennifer before she and Abby disappeared, but investigators later found a note in which Michael apologized to Jennifer for letting the devil get a foothold in their lives. However, that wasn't as strange as the discovery of thousands of adult images in the Blagg home. When questioned about them, he claimed Jennifer had downloaded these images because she wanted to be a good wife and serve her husband. One of Jennifer's friends also provided the police with peculiar information. According to her accounts, right before Jennifer and Abby went missing, Jennifer called her and asked if they could visit her, stating that Michael would not be with them. This was unusual for she, who knew the Blagg family always traveled together. In February 2002, Michael was caught stealing a shredder and a table from his office. He was brought in for questioning about the theft. While answering questions from investigators, Michael kept asking about the possible penalties for murder. This behavior was particularly strange coming from someone whose wife and daughter had disappeared a few months prior. Investigators compiled all their information on Michael and tried to crack him under questioning. One day, when the officers rang Michael's bell, no one answered the door. They could hear the sound of running water coming from inside the house, but no one responded to the knocks on the door. Suspecting something was wrong, the police kicked the door open. When they entered the bathroom, they found Michael lying in the bathtub with his wrists cut. There was also a photo of Jennifer and Abby with him, along with a note saying that he didn't kill his wife or daughter. He was quickly taken to the hospital and given medical care. Due to the harsh winters in Colorado, the search operation was halted until spring. After the initial attempts, the search resumed in April. Investigators marked a 45-kilometer radius for the search operation, but they couldn't find any clues regarding the bodies of Jennifer or Abby. In the meantime, one of Michael's co-workers called the police and shared an important tip. On the day of Jennifer and Abby's disappearance, Michael's colleagues saw him taking the trash out at work. Michael was pushing a pallet jack with 2 large cardboard boxes, which he discarded on the loading dock that led to the trash compactor. The co-worker, unaware of the contents of the trash, even asked Michael if he needed any help discarding it. A person discarding normal trash would have said yes, but Michael Black immediately declined the offer. It was unusual for someone working as an engineer in the company to have anything to do with trash handling. This was an important lead that could take the authorities to Jennifer and Abby's bodies. The first task was locating the landfill where Michael's firm was dumping their trash. Once the landfill site was tracked, the most challenging aspect remained: locating the possible areas in the landfill where trash from Michael's company might have ended up. When this development was revealed to the public, a normal person would have been happy that the case of his wife and daughter's disappearance was nearing closure. However, Michael did exactly the opposite and left the state. It was particularly strange that Michael never shared his plans or his whereabouts with anyone, including the police. Nearly 7 months after Michael's wife and daughter went missing, the authorities finally discovered what they had been searching for. On June 5, 2002, after weeks of searching, they located Jennifer's body in a landfill, wrapped in a red and black tent. The body was unwrapped, cleaned, and sent for an autopsy. The results of the autopsy shocked everyone, including Jennifer's family and friends. She had been shot in the left eye, with the bullet still lodged in her skull. The report indicated she was killed while sleeping, as investigators found a retainer in her mouth that she only wore at night. After discovering Jennifer's body, investigators suspected that Abby's body was also in the same landfill. They intensified their search efforts to find Abby's remains, but despite 7 weeks of searching, sifted through approximately 7,000 tons of trash, the police could not locate her. Michael Black was in custody. The police had a strong reason to arrest Michael, but they faced a challenge: no one knew his whereabouts. After some investigation, they discovered that Michael's mother lived in Georgia, leading them to believe he might be hiding with her. This suspicion turned out to be correct. When the police searched her house, they found Michael there. He was quickly arrested and transported back to Colorado to face charges for the murders of his wife and daughter. This was the first time the public learned that the man pretending to be a grieving husband and father was actually his family's murderer. At this point, Michael's first wife also spoke out in the media, claiming he was a normal person who had never abused her during their marriage. However, as the investigation continued, it became clear that the Black family's life was not as perfect as it appeared. From the start, Jennifer and Michael frequently argued. After they married, Jennifer discovered that Michael was not the religious man she believed him to be. He attended parties, which Jennifer disapproved of due to her religious values. Despite her repeated requests for him to change what she considered unacceptable behavior, Jennifer ultimately told Michael he needed to choose between her and his partying lifestyle. Michael promised Jennifer that he had changed his ways, and their relationship seemed to improve. This period also saw the birth of their daughter, Abby. However, Michael's commitment to the Navy meant he was often away, which contributed to Jennifer experiencing postpartum depression after Abby's birth. When Michael left the Navy and took a job teaching Sunday school, Jennifer learned something alarming: he had begun behaving inappropriately with the children. He was sharing his conservative views on sensitive issues like abortion and intimate, which ultimately led to his dismissal. This incident exacerbated the Black family's financial troubles, as they were struggling to sell their previous home. When the house finally sold, they incurred a loss of over $8,000. Jennifer frequently spoke to her friends in Simpsonville about her dissatisfaction with life in Grand Junction. Despite her unhappiness, she expressed a willingness to remain in Colorado to support Michael, as he seemed content with his job. Meanwhile, as the police sought to uncover the motive behind Michael's alleged murders, a legal firm employee came forward and revealed that Jennifer had visited their office just days before she went missing. She was visibly upset and wanted to consult an attorney. It was later revealed that Jennifer was a victim of abuse at the hands of Michael and was seeking a divorce. Investigators examining Michael's computer discovered that he regularly used an escort service. Interviews with the escort service employees revealed that Michael often visited for massages from topless women. When questioned, Michael claimed that his wife was aware of this because they were having intimate issues, and he went to the massage center for research. However, it was later revealed that Michael had a strong addiction to adult movies and had coerced Jennifer into watching it with him. This explained why Jennifer wanted to separate from Michael. Her diary indicated she was very religious, continually praying and trying to strengthen her relationship with God. Additionally, investigators found a note in one of Jennifer's books where she described a recent argument with her husband. The evidence and testimonies against Michael clearly indicated that he was abusive and pressured Jennifer into unwanted situations. When she resisted, he decided to kill her to hide his secret life and addictions. This also shed light on the disappearance of Abby. Investigators believed she may have witnessed her father's murder of her mother, leading Michael to kill her as well. Due to insufficient evidence linking Michael to the murders of Jennifer and Abby, the prosecution opted not to pursue the death penalty. Michael was granted bail and allowed to live with his mother while he awaited trial. In March 2004, his trial began, and he faced charges of first-degree murder. The prosecution argued that Michael killed his wife because she wanted a divorce. Afterward, he wrapped the bodies of his wife, Jennifer, and their daughter, Abby, and took them to his workplace, where he discarded them. He then acted as if nothing had happened, calling home multiple times and leaving voicemails to give the impression that he was completely unaware of the situation. On November 13th, he called the police, claiming it was a case of home invasion. Jennifer's mother, Marilyn Conway, testified that Jennifer had abused her daughter multiple times during their marriage, including an incident where he choked her while intoxicated. The defense attorney claimed that an intruder broke into their home, killed Jennifer and Abby when they tried to resist. Throughout the trial, Michael insisted he was innocent and not involved in the murders of his wife and daughter. On April 16, 2004, a jury convicted Michael Blagg of murdering his wife, sentencing him to life in prison without parole. However, 10 years later, the conviction was overturned because one of the jurors had falsely reported their history of domestic violence on the juror questionnaire. This led to Michael being granted a retrial, but the Colorado Supreme Court issued an emergency stay to keep him in prison while he awaited the new trial. Michael Blagg's retrial commenced in February 2018, during which his lawyers presented new evidence in hopes of proving his innocence. They also challenged the investigative methods used in the original case. Despite these efforts, Michael was again found guilty of killing his wife and received the same life sentence as before, concluding this tragic case. Abby's body was never found, so Michael was not convicted of any crime related to Abby due to lack of evidence. Danger can sometimes be much closer than we think. Today's story will tell you how even the most ordinary events can turn into a real nightmare for someone. Cheese in a mousetrap can be either free but, on the contrary, too expensive. In any case, before accepting such gifts of fate, you should be careful about who gives them and whether it will cost you your life. The city of New Orleans, Louisiana, USA, was full of dark stories, including slavery and torture. Despite the fact that we seem to live in a civilized world, echoes of horrific events are still heard in New Orleans, occasionally adding to the town's ominous reputation. Today's story took place in this mysterious place. Jaron Lockhart was born on February 28, 1989. She had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. The Lockharts were not happy. Their parents had no formal education, which made employment and earnings difficult. They constantly suffered from financial hardships and struggled even to feed their large household. From an early age, their children faced poverty. They could not afford anything. After nearly a decade of such a life, the family caught the attention of Child Protective Services. It seemed that this could help change their situation for the better, but in reality, the mother managed to retain her rights to her children. Unfortunately, life for their children did not improve. they continued to live in dire need. Naturally, the struggle for survival was unsatisfactory for them, but they had little choice. Against this backdrop, from a very early age, Jaren sought ways to start earning money. She was determined and wanted to take her salvation from the margins into her own hands. She succeeded. At the age of 18, she found a small apartment on the outskirts that she could afford while working part-time. Despite still being a teenager, Jaren began to solve adult problems. She got a job and started to provide for herself, managing this even better than her parents. While she still faced typical teenage challenges, she did not want to drop out of school. She aimed to earn her diploma, then go to college, obtain a higher education, and continue building a career. She was particularly interested in the beauty industry. Jaren's schedule was very busy, but she found time for her creative aspirations. She enjoyed drawing, poetry, and literature. She also wrote poems as a way of self-expression. This creativity helped her cope with the surrounding reality, and she was known for her bright personality. Jaren had a knack for emphasizing her style through clothing and makeup, especially in creating vibrant looks. By the age of 18, Jaren met a guy named Jeremy Foster. According to her, it was love at first sight. They began a relationship that developed over several years. Those who were well acquainted with them described them as a sincere couple with a promising future. They were very active, positive, and complemented each other well. When Jaren found out that she was pregnant and expecting a girl, she had already chosen the name Riley and Lockhart. She was thrilled at the chance to become a mother, having always dreamed of a large family. However, during this time, fears related to her past re-emerged. She worried that she wouldn't be able to provide for her child, create financial stability, or can't prevent her child from experiencing the same beggarly existence that she had known. Jaren was not accustomed to relying on others, so she didn't allow Jeremy to take care of all the financial matters. Memories of her difficult childhood weighed heavily on her, leading to constant tension. While pregnant, she resolved to secure a better future for herself and her child. Jaren planned to obtain her cosmetology diploma in 2012. She successfully completed the program and acquired a license to practice privately. Unfortunately, the niche was overcrowded, so breaking through to a noticeable level required hard work, but this did not scare her. At that time, she worked as a bartender at a nearby club, and in her free time, she started getting some beauty orders. As an employee of the establishment, she mainly relied on tips. However, this was not a stable enough source of income. When Jaren didn't earn enough, she usually had the option to make extra money by dancing at another club in the evenings. She frequently worked part-time as a dancer, a situation that persisted until the changes associated with her pregnancy became apparent. Finally, Riley was born, and Jaren's activities in cosmetology stalled. At first, it was difficult for her to devote time to her development. She had not a single free minute. Everything was spent on Jeremy and Riley. During this period, Jaren wanted to find stability, even considered moving to a motel with her boyfriend and baby to reduce rent expenses and pay the bills. And quickly got herself back in shape to find herself at the pool again. In fact, she did not enjoy this activity but felt forced to do it to avoid financial problems, which still frightened her. Despite the negativity, dancing helped. She rarely faced difficulties. She could provide for herself and her child, paying for housing without needing help from her parents. She often had to dance at night. This repetitive cycle continued until June 6, 2012. It was a Wednesday. Jaren was getting ready for another extra job. Months earlier, she had been unable to pay the full rent, resulting in arrears. As fate would have it, she didn't have time to cover them before the next payment was due. After working a day at the bar, she decided to go dancing that evening. Jaren was preparing for work by 7 p.m., and her shift ended around 2 a.m. Usually, on such nights, she would return home quietly, go to bed so as not to wake Jeremy and her daughter. However, that day was different. On the morning of June 7th, when Jeremy woke up, he immediately noticed that his partner was not nearby. He began to worry, as this was unusual for Jaren. He tried to call her mobile phone but was alarmed to find it turned off. This increased his anxiety, prompting him to call all his friends, relatives, and acquaintances whose numbers he knew. He reached out for help. The men went together to the club where Jaren had been dancing the night before. However, due to club regulations, the administration was prohibited from disclosing information about their employees. This confidentiality, meant to protect the dancers, cruelly hindered the family from discovering whether she had been at work that night. Ultimately, they contacted the local sheriff's department. Unfortunately, the police response was sluggish, and active measures were only taken the next day. Even then, it was of little help, as no information about Jaren emerged in the following days. The police worked with a lack of enthusiasm, knowing that a striptease dancer had gone missing, which they equated to that of a call girl. It was difficult to convince them that she was a young mother and a decent woman. Around 5:30 p.m. on June 8, the children were walking on one of the beaches of the Gulf of Mexico, Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, during low tide. Part of the coast was exposed, and the teenagers spotted a suspicious object at the very edge of the water. When they approached and looked closer, they realized with horror that it was a human torso. The children ran away from the scene and informed the adults, who immediately called the police. Officers found part of a woman's body on the beach, leading to immediate difficulties with identification. However, tattoos and piercings were visible, which should have simplified the process. Unfortunately, at first, no connection was made between the discovered body and Jaren's disappearance. After several days of comparisons, law enforcement finally paid attention to Jaren's disappearance report. Her bright appearance stood out from the others. The tattoos found on the body matched the descriptions provided by Jaren's relatives, who affirmed that they resembled those Jaren had. Despite no documents being found nearby, the police began reviewing all reports of missing persons in the area. When they contacted the Lockhart family, the police took detailed descriptions of Jaren's piercings, tattoos, even small scars and birthmarks. However, due to the long stay in the water, the paint had faded and spread significantly, and this method did not provide a 100% probability of identification. It was decided to conduct DNA testing, which allowed for the identification of the victim as a close relative of the Lockhart family. In the following days, several items of clothing washed up on the coast that relatives recognized as belonging to Jaren. Now, there were questions about the classification of the incident and efforts to establish the exact cause of death. Due to the absence of all body parts, this task proved to be impossible. The forensic expert analyzed the available remains and assumed that the girl died because of a deep cut on her chest, which resembled a knife wound. At the same time, the circumstances of her death remained unclear. One theory proposed that she could have drowned and then ended up under the propellers of a ship passing by. Overall, the police persistently tried to connect the death with water and classify it as an accident to quickly close the case. Fortunately, pressure from relatives prevented the investigation from being stalled. To fully state the cause of death and the circumstances surrounding it, it was necessary to find all body parts. Later, 2 legs and the head were found on the coast. Presumably, the body had been dismembered to make identification difficult. This opinion was confirmed after investigators discovered that areas of skin on the body, where tattoos had also been removed. The forensic expert was unable to find any foreign DNA samples. All traces of the crime had naturally been washed away by the water. A toxicological examination showed the presence of a small amount of alcohol in the blood. However, the concentration was insufficient to cause her death. That's where the information ended. No matter how thoroughly they searched the coast, no other remains could be found. Law enforcement officers continued the investigation in hopes of obtaining more information and finally decided to reconstruct the last day of Jaren's life. They focused on the evening when she went to the club for her next work shift. Her relatives provided a detailed account of her movements up until she left for work. They reported that what happened afterward remained a mystery, as the club administration refused to provide any information regarding Jaren. It was unclear whether she had even shown up that night. When the police arrived at the club, they were met with the same cold reception as the Lockhart family, possibly even worse, because such establishments traditionally do not welcome the attention of the authorities. This could significantly complicate their task. However, at the request of the police and with a warrant in hand, the administration eventually provided information as well as access to video surveillance recordings. It was determined that Jaren did indeed arrive for her shift at around 7 p.m. and, as usual, she worked the evening without any incidents, leaving at approximately 2 a.m. There was nothing unusual in her behavior, except for one small detail: that night, she left the club not alone. The video revealed that Jaren was accompanied by a young athletic man and a woman. When the police contacted the club employees and administration again, no one could definitively identify the individuals seen in the video surveillance recording, or perhaps they simply didn't know them. The dancers also failed to provide any valuable information. In fact, some refused to talk to the police over the weekend, leaving the possibility for further assistance open. The police had no choice but to print out photographs of the individuals who accompanied Jaren. These two were probably the last ones to see her alive and might have known something or been involved in her death. Unfortunately, the photos did not clearly show the faces of the individuals. However, they did give an idea of what the probable criminals were wearing. It was also possible to note what Jaren had with them, which provided valuable clues. Still, the lack of names and an approximate direction for the search was complicated by the fact that, similar to other cases, a gang of killers specializing in strippers was operating in the city. Some dancers were even afraid to go to work. Detectives continued to question the girls in the hope that at least someone would recognize the couple in the photo. Investigators decided to take advantage of the excitement among the strippers to encourage them to talk, but they genuinely had no information. Finally, on one day, detectives met with one of the dancers who had also worked at the club on the night of Jaren's disappearance. She remembered the couple from the photo, as both had approached her that evening. The young man offered her the opportunity to take part in a private party being organized at a house outside the city for a tidy sum. He said that there would be a bachelor party at a friend's house and that they needed a dancer for the whole evening. It sounded legitimate. People often approached the club with similar offers. However, this time, everyone they approached rejected the offers for work, particularly since they were offering a substantial amount of money, which was unusual even for a whole night of dancing. Of course, the club employees assumed that they wanted something more than just dancing on the pole, but the couple rejected these assumptions. Regardless, none of the dancers agreed to take the offer. Despite the detailed description and additional information, none of the girls had more precise data to identify the suspicious couple. The investigation was at a standstill. Finally, another girl, also a club worker, went to the police station and identified the individuals in the photo as 40-year-old Terry Speaks and his 28-year-old wife, Margaret Sanchez. The police immediately found their addresses and detained them. While the suspects spoke to the investigators, the police began questioning their neighbors. The man living across the street provided valuable clues to the investigation. He reported that the morning after Jaren's disappearance, he had seen Terry leaving the house with several large black bags. The witness noted that it was obvious Terry was struggling, despite being a strong man. He refused the neighbor's offer of help, but that was not what alarmed the neighbor. He noted that the bags had a suspicious smell. As Terry walked past, a strong odor of cleaning products hit his nose, which seemed alarming. When asked what was in the bags, Terry rudely refused to explain and continued loading them into his car. Detectives quickly discovered that Margaret was a rather strange woman with specific aesthetic tastes. She dressed extravagantly, which seemed unusual. She was attractive, athletic, yet her behavior did not align with her appearance. While communicating, she seemed somewhat socially awkward and often avoided contact with others. Sometimes, she would even shy away from someone who simply said hello or wished her a good day. When acquaintances of they were asked about Terry, they provided even more alarming information, with most considering him to be genuinely dangerous due to his past outbursts of aggression. Immediately, locals informed the police that they had heard Terry was wanted for indecent liberties. This information seemed odd because, although several people knew about it, no one had contacted the police to report him. When Terry was checked in the database, it turned out he was indeed wanted in North Carolina for a series of violent crimes, the most serious of which involved the assault of a minor. He argued in court that it was consensual but claimed the victim later changed her story out of spite. The victim insisted that Terry had threatened to kill her if she resisted. In the end, he received a short sentence for assault but was quickly released. Now, he was on probation, which he repeatedly violated, prompting him to flee to another state to avoid incarceration. While analyzing the personalities of Terry and Margaret, the police learned that Margaret worked as a dancer in several clubs, including the one where Jaron worked. On June 6, both Jaron and Margaret were scheduled for the night shift, and her husband came in as a client. Terry and Margaret had been inseparable since they met in 2009. As it turned out, she and Jaron occasionally crossed paths at the club, eventually becoming colleagues and friends. At that point, the police aimed to investigate whether Margaret could lure Jaron into a trap. The most valuable clue the police had at that time was information about Terry's car, in which he loaded the suspicious bags before driving away. The police were able to track his movements using video cameras and managed to record him at several locations around the city. They identified several spots where Terry disposed of suspicious bags, leading them to conclude that he was likely scattering the remains of his victim to make it harder to find her. This premise was the most plausible assumption made by the investigators. This information was sufficient to detain both suspects until the circumstances were clarified, and they were held in custody since Terry posed a high flight risk. Unfortunately, their arrest was not enough to prompt the suspects to talk. They stubbornly remained silent. However, the police had another trump card, a warrant to search their home. Margaret and Terry were detained fairly quickly, generating hope that they couldn't manage to destroy the evidence. This was crucial since all the evidence detectives currently had was circumstantial. Fortunately, a real jackpot awaited the police at Terry and Margaret's house. There were hundreds of emails on their computers, in which they discussed in detail the events of that fateful night. It all started with a discussion of the murder and ended with the spouses literally threatening each other, apparently both afraid and mistrustful of one another, fearing that the other would set them up. Ultimately, it was this correspondence that implicated them the most. The detectives decided to employ a trick. They wanted to show Margaret and Terry's letters separately, without revealing that everything had already been read, as if they were looking at the phones for the first time. It was worth opening the messenger in front of Terry and Margaret, as they began to accuse each other. This was the main goal of the police. The investigators executed this trick well, and it was evident that the primary suspects were indeed detained correctly. However, the situation changed little as it was impossible to obtain a confession. Margaret and Terry simply shifted responsibility onto one another, leaving the motive for the massacre unclear. Nonetheless, it was likely an abuse assault since Terry and Margaret initially wanted to convince several other girls to join them at a mansion outside the city, indicating that the specific victim may not have been important to them. This hints at the fact that the $1,000 offered for the bachelor party could have resolved urgent financial issues that Jaron was desperately trying to address. Probably, this was a decisive factor in agreeing to go to the party. Additionally, Margaret could have persuaded Jaron, as she was someone Jaron trusted. When Jaron ended up in Terry's house, it seems he wanted more than just a dance. A conflict arose between them that led to death. Continuing to investigate the flow of information, the police confirmed that no bachelor party. This was an obvious lie. Judging by the correspondence of Margaret and Terry, this attack had been planned for several months. It turned out that at the end of May, they began plotting a bloody massacre and even visited the locations where Terry later disposed of the bags containing remains. They scouted the area, taking pictures that were later deleted. Nevertheless, the police managed to restore and reveal the bloody plan of this deranged couple. Direct evidence of Margaret's involvement in the murder was not found within the house. However, a metal container was discovered in which something had obviously been burned recently. The police examined the area but were unable to recover the contents, as the investigation believed the criminals had disposed of some evidence and simply did not have time to get rid of the rest. However, even the correspondence was enough for the jury, as the few messages very eloquently described what had happened. In 2015, Terry was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for premeditated murder, concealing evidence of a crime, and desecrating remains. The situation with his wife turned out to be more complicated. However, a decision was made that resulted in Margaret Sanchez receiving a 40-year sentence for obstruction of justice and another 40 years for manslaughter. The sentences would be served consecutively, amounting to 80 years. Margaret and Terry never confessed during the trial. They showed no remorse or regret. Margaret refused to provide any comments to justify her actions or explain her motives. Consequently, it was not possible to accurately reconstruct the chronology of events. In narrow circles of popular theories, there were rumors about Margaret and Terry's involvement in the occult, their planning of ritual murders in a satanic style. They allegedly planned to kill several girls. Fortunately, they were stopped and can no longer harm anyone. In 1995, 11-year-old Lacey Phillips lived with her mother, Mary, her father, James, and her older siblings. Brother Jesse, who was 15 at the time, and sister Darla, who was 17. The family was very close-knit and had a strong bond. The Phillips family lived in their own home in a small town called Bald Knob, Arkansas, which they had moved to 5 years earlier from Hope, Arkansas. They considered Bald Knob an ideal place for family life and raising children. Mary was known as a loving mother and wife, fond of gardening, outdoor recreation. The Phillips family was a typical American family, slowly building their happiness, unaware of how cruelly it would eventually be destroyed. On June 6, 1995, 11-year-old Lacey was under the supervision of her older sister, Darla. Both were students, but summer vacation had begun. Their mothers go to work during this time, and often the children will stay at home waiting for their parents to return. However, at 4 p.m. that day, Lacey had an appointment with the dentist, which coincided with Mary's end of her work shift. Consequently, Darla drove Lacey to the workplace, where their mother worked as an accountant in an automated tax and accounting service. It was planned that Lacey would wait until her mother finished work and then go to the appointment together. Darla later described this outing as completely ordinary. She talked with Mary for a while, and then Darla went home, planning to meet her friends later. She and her mother said goodbye and hugged, unaware that this would be their last meeting. Although Mary and Lacey were expected to be a little late coming back from the dentist, it was merely a routine checkup that wasn't supposed to take long. Meanwhile, Jesse and Darla were left alone at home. Their father was on a business trip 500 kilometers away. The siblings expected their mother and Lacey to return by 5 p.m., but as much more time passed with no sign of mother, they began to worry. At around 6 p.m., both teenagers grew increasingly worried as neither returned from the dentist's office. Lacey is too young to have her own plans, and Mary had no other plans for the evening. Even if something had changed, Mary always called the children to inform them if she would be late. Her uncharacteristic absence without warning heightened their concern. Darla assumed her mother might be late at work, so she called the office but received no answer. Concerned, she then headed to the dental clinic, but there was no sign of Mary or Lacey. Time passed, and as the sun began to set, Darla contacted their father to share their growing worries. He suggested they leave the house and look around the area, considering that Mary's car might have broken down or she might need help. Jesse and Darla searched the vicinity but found nothing. They returned to their house and reported their findings to their father, prompting him to contact the police. A dispatch officer spoke to James to gather necessary information. He provided details about where Mary worked, the car she drove, and their trip to the dentist set for around 4 p.m. The most alarming fact was that Mary and Lacey never reached the dentist. Law enforcement took James's report seriously, confirming that no one had arrived at the dental office. Around midnight, an officer was dispatched to check Mary's workplace. Upon arrival at the parking lot in front of the building, the patrolman noticed a pickup truck parked alone. After checking the license plate, he confirmed it was indeed Mary Phillips' vehicle. This discovery intensified fears that something had gone terribly wrong. The car was intact and locked, so the officer decided to check the office where Mary worked. He knocked on the door, which surprisingly opened because it was unlocked. Upon entering, he found the lights were off and had to use a flashlight to explore. It was then that he discovered something horrifying: the body of a woman covered in blood, with her hands tightly bound behind her back. A cord from a household appliance was wrapped around her neck, and her clothes were pulled down. The officer immediately realized she had been brutally beaten. A pulse check indicated she was dead. The body was cold, suggesting she had been killed hours earlier. The office resembled the aftermath of a violent struggle, with blood scattered around, intensifying concerns that the perpetrator might still be present. The patrolman called for reinforcements and continued to carefully inspect the rooms while waiting for his colleagues to arrive. He checked the office and then moved to the utility rooms, where he noticed a trail of blood leading to another door, which was also unlocked. He entered without any problems and saw a gruesome scene. In the middle of the room was a chair to which a girl was tied, also covered in blood. There was especially a lot of blood. Her face showed clear signs of having received several blows to the head. Thought the girl was dead, he managed to take several pictures of the second victim when she suddenly woke up, opened her eyes, and looked in his direction. Later, the police officer recalled this moment as one of the most terrible and unexpected in his life, as if he had seen a dead person returning to life. The patrolman immediately turned to his colleagues and, in addition to requesting reinforcements, asked them to call for doctors. He freed the girl and tried to provide first aid, but it quickly became obvious that she was in serious condition and that only doctors could fully help her. Despite her injuries, she was conscious and could speak. She clearly stated that her name was Lacey Phillips. The only thing that worried her was her mother's condition. She asked several times what had happened to Mary and if everything was okay with her, but the policeman distracted her from these troubling thoughts, not telling her the truth. The medics arrived a few minutes later, and Lacey was urgently taken to the nearest medical facility. On the way, she regained consciousness and then lost it again. Lacey had sustained a serious head injury from several strong blows to the head with a blunt object. Additionally, marks were found on her neck indicating strangulation, and in addition to sustaining a fracture in her cranial vault, she had a broken jaw. Mary's husband, James, was notified that something had happened to his loved ones but was given no details. He immediately packed his things and left for the city to see his daughter in the hospital to support her. He was shocked and did not understand what had happened to his family. Now, the doctors did not dare to provide a prognosis on whether the Phillips' youngest daughter, Lacey, would survive. An even greater blow was the death of 34-year-old Mary. She could not be saved and had died before the patrolman arrived. Forensic experts worked at the crime scene but were unable to find any clues that would lead to the criminal. Their only hope was Lacey, who had miraculously survived the attack, and they awaited news from the medical center with excitement. A few hours later, doctors managed to stabilize Lacey's condition. The morning after the attack, on June 7th, she woke up in hospital. She was in the intensive care unit, and they were finally able to communicate. Despite her traumatic brain injury, she remembered perfectly what had happened. Later, Lacey admitted that all of it was captured in her memory. Lacey began to recount the frightening details of how her older sister had taken her to their mother's workplace at about 3 p.m. She remained in the office until 3:45 p.m., as both of them were getting ready to go to the dentist's office for a routine checkup. The workday was almost over. But a few minutes before it ended, an unfamiliar man entered the office. He immediately headed to the desk where Mary worked. She and Mary looked at him and even stepped back. There was something frightening in his gaze, but they thought he was just a client who had come into the office. When the stranger raised his hands, it became obvious that he was not there for advice. He was wearing latex gloves. In one hand, he held a roll of wire, and in the other, a gun with which he threatened Mary and Lacey. The man announced that it was a robbery. Mary tried to cover herself and protect her daughter, but he pushed Mary's aside, knocked her to the floor, and began tying her wrists behind her back with the wire. Lacey was confused, scared, and unable to react. Everything happened too quickly. After tying up Mary, the unknown man shouted at Lacey and ordered her to follow him into another room. He brought a chair from Mary's office, placed it in the middle of the room, and forced she to sit on it while he tied her hands to the chair behind her back. She cried, begged him not to harm her and her mother. The criminal said he would not harm Mary but would hurt her daughter. After securing Lacey to the chair with wire, he immediately hit her hard on the head with the handle of the pistol. Her eyes went dark, and she lost consciousness. After which, the the stranger left the room, closing the door behind him. Lacey was left alone. She was tightly tied up and couldn't even move. She felt like she was bleeding from her head. Lacey regained consciousness a few minutes later, looked around, and saw that blood was all around the chair. She was in pain, but she couldn't imagine the extent of the head injury she had sustained. She began to scream and call for help, hoping that her mother would enter the room and untie her. The door swung open, and to her horror, it was the same man again. He was furious that she was still alive and screamed, striking she again before grabbing her by the neck and beginning to strangle her until she lost consciousness once more. This lasted for several minutes. Perhaps the criminal was afraid of being caught, so he wanted to escape from the building as quickly as possible. He believed he had killed Lacey, turned off the light, and left the room. The criminal immediately fled the office. Several hours passed. Lacey came to her senses but then lost consciousness again. Each time she regained consciousness, she tried to get free and called for her mother but received no response. Her hands were tightly bound with metal wire. Lacey grew weaker with every minute. The only hope for salvation was the thought that someone would find them. About 8 hours passed during which Lacey remained locked in the dark room, bleeding. She was half asleep, could barely move, and had lost all strength. Suddenly, the girl heard a faint clicking sound coming from the next room. At first, she was scared that it was the attacker, but then the sounds were repeated next to her, and flashes appeared in her half-asleep state. Lacey realized it looked like a photo shoot. She confirmed it when she opened her eyes and saw someone taking her picture. Fortunately, it was not the criminal. It was a policeman who had arrived at the office to check on Lacey. Lacey remembered how the ambulance had arrived, how the policeman freed her. She was losing and regaining consciousness on the way to the intensive care unit of the nearest children's hospital. All this time, the doctors talked to her to keep her conscious. At each moment of clarity, Lacey tried to find out what had happened to her mother, but she never received an answer to any of her questions. Even now, while talking to the police, she still did not know that Mary was dead. After the police visit to the hospital, her father, brother, and sister came into the ward. They brought balloons and soft toys. Lacey still believed that her mother, like her, was in the hospital and had probably also suffered at the hands of the attacker but was still alive. The whole day of June 7th, Lacey's relatives spent with she, but they never answered any of her questions about Mary. She saw how, with each passing moment, her father's eyes filled with tears. Doubt began to creep in, but at that time, Lacey was still too weak and simply pushed away the bad thoughts. In the evening, James gathered his strength, went up to his daughter, knelt down, and hugged her. In a trembling voice, he told her that Mary was now in heaven with her great-grandmother. The detective leading the investigation could not afford to be sentimental, as the criminal responsible for the attack was still on the loose and might strike again. The local residents were in danger, and the bloodthirsty killer had to be stopped urgently. When Lacey found out about this, she realized with horror that she was the only chance for the police to catch the criminal. She also understood that she was in great danger and that the attacker might return to eliminate her as an unwanted witness. In the office where he committed the murder and attempted murder, the stranger left no traces. He managed to avoid leaving evidence by using latex gloves, which Lacey reported. However, he left biological fluids after abusing Mary, but their examination would take time, and the research capabilities of that era were much more modest. Therefore, the results only allowed the police to limit the circle of suspects, which at that point was not substantial. The criminal was likely an experienced killer. He knew how to avoid being caught, acted covertly, and used gloves. However, the police still had the main source of information, Lacey. She remembered the attacker perfectly and provided a very detailed description, including the smallest details of his clothing, appearance. Having learned that this man had taken her mother away from her, she was determined to bring him to justice. Describing the face of the criminal, Lacey suddenly recalled one important detail. Before he struck her on the head, while he had tied her hands with metal wire, she noticed a teardrop tattoo on his face, as well as a tattoo on his arm. This detail allowed the detectives to match these distinctive features with registered criminals. Detectives quickly identified a 31-year-old man named Jack Jones. who had the tattoos described by Lacey. Jack was well known to the local police for multiple robbery charges, but investigators did not suspect that he was responsible for much more serious crimes. The police quickly discovered Jack Jones's last known residence and went to apprehend him, expecting that he might already be on the run. To their surprise, Jack personally opened the door, did not seem alarmed at all. He was immediately brought to the station for questioning. While being taken to the department, detectives contemplated what tactics to employ to get the criminal to talk. To their surprise, no tricks were needed. As soon as Jack was asked about Mary and Lacey, he calmly began to recount what had happened. He stated that he had seen Mary standing in her office early that same day while he was driving past. As soon as it happened, he decided that he wanted to kill her because he found her incredibly beautiful. He returned later, knowing that the office closed around 4 p.m., when there should have been no one there. However, he saw a girl there but did not retreat. He tied up Lacey in the room because he was not interested in her. His goal from the very beginning was Mary. He bound her hands behind her back, placed her on the floor, abused her, and then cut a cord from the kettle, wrapped it around her neck, and began to strangle her. According to Jack Jones, this murder was an act of revenge for the abuse of his wife, as her attacker remained unpunished. The investigation revealed that Jack's wife did report the crime to the police, but later she retracted her statement against the abuser, leading to his release. Jack insisted that his wife was indeed abused, but why Mary had to pay for it remained a mystery. On the evening of June 7, 1995, Jack Jones was arrested for the abuse and murder of Mary. He was also charged with the attempted murder of Lacey. When the Phillips family was informed, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, as no one could be sure that the killer wouldn't come back to eliminate the only witness. However, their fight was just beginning, as Jack still had to be brought to justice in court. Thanks to his confession, there should not be any problems. Lacey did not want to attend the hearings to avoid further trauma, but the existing evidence against him was enough to send him to prison. The trial began in April of 1996. By that time, law enforcement officials had carefully reviewed all the evidence against Jack. It was decided to show in court a recording of Lacey's account, made on a dictaphone while she was recovering from her injuries in the hospital. She quickly recovered physically, but psychologically she was broken. However, even in such a state, she wanted justice. The defense attorney tried to refute her statement, but the jury did not believe him. The defendant himself pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming that he was not himself during the attack on the mother and daughter because he was treating his bipolar disorder with illegal drugs. His arguments about a difficult childhood were also unconvincing. Ultimately, the jury found Jack Jones guilty on all counts. For the murder of Mary Phillips, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For the brutal beating of Lacey, he received a life sentence along with an additional 30 years and a fine of $15,000 for the attempted murder of Lacey. But this was not the end of Jack's criminal story. While on death row, he confessed to another murder, that of 32-year-old Lori Barrett. This incident occurred during her 5-day vacation in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where she planned to visit friends. Because she arrived late, she didn't want to bother her friend's family and decided to stay at a hotel instead. That evening, Barrett went to a local bar to relax after her trip. There, she met a young man with several tattoos. According to several witnesses who spoke to the police, Barrett was seen drinking with the stranger until about 2 a.m. in the hotel patio. After that, they went up in the elevator together, presumably to her room. The next day, she failed to show up for a planned barbecue with her friend. Later, a cleaning lady went to her room and found her body, which had been abused and strangled. Jack Jones confessed to this murder in 2005, claiming that he liked Barrett right away, and they spent the whole evening together before going up to her room. However, the details of what happened next and the reason for the attack remain unknown, as Jack refused to disclose them. For the trial related to this case, he was extradited to Florida and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, after which he was returned to Arkansas to await execution. Interestingly, Jack Jones could have been caught and convicted of this crime while it was still being committed. A composite sketch was created based on witness statements and footage from the hotel's security cameras. His sister identified him after seeing the sketch in a newspaper and showed it to their father, who insisted that she never talk about the event or show Jack's image to anyone else. She complied, remaining silent. Jack's father then put him on a bus and sent him to Arkansas to prevent anyone from recognizing him based on the composite sketch. Unfortunately, it cost Mary Phillips her life. When Jack's family was questioned about the story, they admitted that they knew their son had met with Barrett before the attack but did not believe that Jack could be involved in such a brutal crime. Consequently, the father decided not to contact the police. They described Jack as a very complex person who grew increasingly gloomy and cruel with age, taking out his anger not only on his siblings but also on his parents. However, they justified his behavior until the last moment, believing he could be loving and gentle. They did not think he was capable of murder. On April 24, 2017, 52-year-old Jack Jones was executed for the murder of Mary Phillips at the Cummins unit, along with abuser-murderer Marcel Williams, marking the first double execution in the country in 17 years. Jones and Williams were 2 of 4 inmates executed in Arkansas in April 2017, the other 2 being convicted murderers Liddell Lee and Kenneth Williams. Jones's last meal consisted of fried chicken, fries with tartar sauce, beef jerky, 3 candy bars, a chocolate milkshake, and juice. Lacey, now grown, was present at the execution. When Jack was given his last words, he turned to the victim's daughter, tenderly called her by name, and claimed that he had perceived her as his daughter all his life. Naturally, this only caused her disgust and anger. After the execution, it was revealed that Jack Jones was involved in another murder. Just before his execution, he gave his sister a letter he had written in 2006, with instructions to open it a year after his execution. She respected his request. When she finally opened the letter from her brother, she read a terrible confession. On May 2, 1983, 20-year-old Regina Harrison left her house in the evening to ride her bike. At that time, 19-year-old Jack Jones was riding his bike towards the beach. He meets Regina, who catches his eye, and secretly follows her to a deserted street, where he attacks, abuses, and kills her. They began to search for her that same evening after Regina did not return home at the appointed time. The next day, her body was found in a nearby park with signs of abuse and strangulation, which became the cause of death. During the investigation of this crime, detectives found a witness who identified the criminal as Ronald Stewart, who was passing by the park at the approximate time of the murder. In January of 1985, Ronald pleaded guilty and was then sentenced to 50 years in prison. He died behind bars of cancer in 2008. It later turned out that the only reason an innocent man took the blame was that Ronald Stewart had already committed a series of abuses of other girls. He had been convicted of those crimes and was now afraid of the death penalty, so he made a deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Ronald never denied his guilt during his lifetime, but DNA testing later showed that he was not guilty of Regina's murder. After Jack Jones' sister, Lynn, went to the police and handed over the letter confessing to the murder, DNA testing was conducted, and in February 2019, his words were officially confirmed: Jack was behind Regina's murder. Before the execution, he lost one of his legs due to diabetes. He stated that he was ready to die, and it remains unknown why he confessed to the murders of Mary and Barrett but did not do the same regarding Regina Harrison until he only mentioned it in a letter to his sister. After the execution, it became official that Jack had killed at least 3 young women. Law enforcement officials now believe that he could have been involved in more brutal crimes. Mary's widower, after Jack's death, spoke out against people who expressed support for the criminal. There were supporters of the killer who believed that he deserved a lighter sentence and demanded that the execution be cancelled. However, James said that he did not believe they would have maintained such a loyal attitude towards the criminal if he had killed their loved ones. Lacey, after talking to journalists, said that she could finally move on with her life. Justice had finally prevailed, and this dangerous criminal would no longer be able to harm anyone. However, even despite the execution, she believed that she would never be able to completely free herself from the consequences of the horror she had endured. Mariana Jocelyn Baltira Valenzuela was born on November 24, 1998, in the city of Ixtapan de la Sal, located in the state of Mexico. She is the older sibling of 2 children from a modest family. Fate decreed that she had to fight for her life from her first days. She was born much earlier than expected, and doctors seriously feared that the child, with a critically low weight, would not survive, which they informed her parents, Syra and Orlando. Mariana spent the first 2 months of her life in a hospital, in a special ward for premature babies. Her mother prayed day and night for her daughter's health, and her prayers were answered. The girl quickly recovered and gained weight. By the new year of 1999, she was discharged home, allowing her parents to celebrate the holiday with their daughter. Fortunately, Mariana had no external consequences of prematurity. She grew up slim and beautiful, but her health was very poor from a very early age. When Mariana was 4 years old, a second child appeared in the family, a boy. Mariana adored her younger brother and helped her parents take care of him. From the earliest age, they were very close and practically inseparable. At the age of 6, Mariana was diagnosed with epilepsy, which required her to regularly take special medications to minimize the likelihood of seizures. The prescribed drugs and constant monitoring by specialists yielded good results, allowing her to lead a relatively ordinary life, not too different from her peers. Moreover, she treated her health responsibly, following the regimen and taking the necessary medications. Mariana studied well at school, drew beautifully, and loved music. She was a very kind, open, and sincere girl. Everyone who knew her personally spoke positively about her. However, she was also modest and shy, especially in her teenage years. She had only a couple of best friends, did not go on dates, did not attend parties, and hardly interacted with boys. Mariana preferred to spend time at home with her family, with whom she had very close and warm relationships. The fragile and petite girl looked much younger than her age. At 16, she seemed no older than 13. Kind-hearted and sympathetic, Mariana always tried to help homeless animals, which she fed, treated, looked after, and then handed over to safe hands. As a high school student, she finally decided to become a veterinarian and provide professional assistance to those in need. Her parents often said that their daughter was too naive and trusting. She didn't perceive evil or danger from other people, as she herself brought only light and kindness into the world. Therefore, her father and mother were always worried that Mariana could be offended or harmed by someone taking advantage of her innocence. The area where the Baltira family lived was relatively calm. Almost everyone who lived there knew each other by sight. However, along their street, there were a large number of shops where many migrant workers worked unofficially. Some of them lived right in the shops, as most did not have their own housing, and some could not even afford to rent a room. Naturally, among these workers were individuals with extensive criminal histories. But, as long as they performed their duties properly, the shop owners usually had no complaints about them. About 50 meters from the Baltira family home was a butcher shop. The shop owner hired 4 workers, 2 locals who sold goods, 2 immigrants unloading cargo, butchered carcasses, and cleaned the store. The shop owner allowed the workers to stay on the second floor of the shop, which was an attic. As Mariana grew older, her parents began to periodically ask her to go shopping for the family, including to the aforementioned butcher shop. There she repeatedly encountered one Cruz Quintero Martinez, a worker of the landlord who lived on the second floor. She felt fear of this man just by his presence. She repeatedly told her friends and her parents that there was something sinister in his gaze that made her blood run cold. At the same time, there was nothing specific she could blame on this man since he did not approach her or attempt to contact her in any way, but merely looked at her. So her parents decided not to let their daughter go to this store anymore and went shopping for the necessities themselves. At some point, Juan Martinez committed a minor theft, resulting in the store owner's decision to fire him. After that incident, they did not hear from him for about a year. However, in early summer 2017, he returned to his former workplace, tearfully begged his former employer to rehire him, assuring him that he would work diligently. Remarkably, he was rehired and moved back into the second floor of the store. Cyrus' niece was visiting the Baltiras while Mariana and her younger brother were on summer vacation, with Orlando being the only one at work. Around 9 a.m., Syra asked her daughter to go to the local supermarket to buy breakfast. She believed her daughter was old enough to handle such a task. Moreover, the street was well lit and crowded. In her opinion, nothing bad could happen. She gave her daughter some money and asked Mariana to buy milk, eggs, and vegetables. Mariana left the house dressed in an old t-shirt and pajama pants. The store was located less than a couple of 100 meters from their house, so the round trip to get there, buy the necessary items, and return should not have taken more than half an hour. However, when an hour passed and Mariana still had not returned, her mother grew concerned, especially since Mariana's phone was left at home. With her little niece in her arms, Syra went to look for her daughter. She walked down the street to the store and asked the cashiers if they had seen a young girl in glasses. They informed her that a girl fitting her description had bought groceries a quarter of an hour ago and had left the store. Panic began to set in. Syra realized that something terrible had happened. Syra returned home, asked her son to look after his niece, and then went out to the street, where she began asking neighbors, street vendors, and passers-by if they had seen her daughter. However, it seemed as if the girl had vanished without a trace. Syra immediately reported the incident to the police and called her husband, who rushed home from work to help find their daughter. By the time the police arrived at the scene, dozens of neighbors, as well as relatives and friends of the Baltira family, had already joined the search. They called all of Mariana's acquaintances, combed the streets, and posted printed leaflets with her photographs. Initially, law enforcement officials were not particularly concerned about the situation. They asked the parents whether their daughter could have gone on a date or visited someone. Syra and Orlando insisting that their daughter would never go anywhere without informing them, especially since she had gone to the store in her home clothes and with a grocery bag, knowing she was expected back home. There were surveillance cameras installed in the area where Mariana disappeared, but almost none of them were functional. The entire day of searching yielded no results, and not a single trace of the girl was found. As night fell, anxiety and panic turned into despair. The parents realized that they would likely never see Mariana alive again. The next day, July 28, at about 8 a.m., Mariana's parents received a call from a nearby relative, who informed them that several police cars had arrived at a butcher's shop. Without hesitation, the Baltira got ready and went to the indicated location. Law enforcement agencies did not allow them inside. But Syra and Orlando had no intention of leaving. Minutes after checking the scene, one of the police officers informed Orlando that the body of a young girl, identified as the missing Mariana, had been found on the second floor of the building, lifeless and badly mutilated. Orlando was invited inside to confirm her identity, but Syra was strongly advised against entering, as the crime scene was truly shocking. Orlando could not believe his eyes as he looked at the body lying in a puddle of blood, his daughter. His world collapsed in an instant, and he did not know how to tell his wife, who was waiting outside. Mariana had been repeatedly abused and brutally mutilated. The cause of death was massive blood loss due to a stab wound to the stomach. The perpetrator cut open her abdomen while she was still alive, leaving her to bleed to death. An expert opinion showed that her death occurred on the night of July 27th, just a few hours before the discovery of her body. Therefore, she was alive for almost 24 hours from the time of her disappearance, during which the criminal abused her until he fatally wounded her. The murder weapon, a knife intended for cutting up carcasses, was found on the floor next to her body. The body was discovered by the owner of the store when he arrived for work that morning. According to him, every last Thursday of the month was designated as cleaning day, during which he did not work. On that day, the owner was engaged in organizational matters, meetings with suppliers, and submitting reports to the tax office while his employees cleaned and disinfected the premises. When he arrived in the morning, he immediately noticed blood stains on the floor. Initially thinking that one of his employees living on the second floor had been injured, he was shocked to find bloody men's clothing, a knife, and the body of a young girl in a pool of blood. In addition, a large sum of money had gone missing from the cash register, which the criminal had evidently taken upon fleeing. Two men who lived and worked at the store immediately came under suspicion. However, one of them showed up for work an hour later, appearing just as shocked as everyone else. He explained that he had to return home to another city urgently, and his colleague, Juan, said Juan would cover for him and clean the store himself. The police concluded that this man was telling the truth, noting that there were no traces of him at the crime scene, and he was excluded from the list of suspects. By that time, CCTV footage from the supermarket, which Mariana had visited on the last day of her life, was obtained. The footage showed she entering the store, followed by one a few minutes later, the man who worked at the butcher's shop and had instilled genuine fear in Mariana. He stalked his victim like a wild animal hunting prey, following her out of the supermarket without purchasing anything. After that, both of their trails vanished. Reconstructing the sequence of events outside the store proved impossible. Although there were cameras on the street, they were non-functional, and none of the numerous passers-by or street sellers reported anything suspicious. Mariana's parents were convinced that their daughter would never have gone with this man, no matter how he might have lured her. They believed he had forcibly taken her to the store. However, they were left wondering why she did not scream or call for help, and why none of the many passers-by or street vendors noticed anything unusual about the situation. 27-year-old Juan Cruz Quintero Martinez was characterized as withdrawn and uncommunicative. Those who knew him said that he was a violent person with sadistic tendencies, which he displayed towards homeless animals. Previously, he had attracted the attention of the police for harassment and causing serious bodily harm. He got a job as a worker in a butcher's shop in early 2015. For a long time, according to the shop owner, there were no questions or complaints about him. Juan did his job conscientiously, but in mid-2016, he was caught stealing money and was subsequently fired. After losing his job, he returned to his parents' home, where his sick elderly mother and his sister, who took care of her, lived. For almost a year, Juan literally sat on their necks, stealing money, selling things from the house, abusing alcohol, and using illegal substances. In addition, he regularly beat his mother and sister. One day, tired of the constant bullying, his sister threatened to call the police if he did not leave the house. Juan, unwilling to deal with law enforcement again, obediently left. Since he had nowhere else to go, he asked his former employer to rehire him. The owner of the butcher shop agreed, providing him with a place to work and a roof over his head, allowing him to continue living on the second floor. It was mid-June 2017, just a month before the tragedy. Juan did his job conscientiously, but about a week later, he met Mariana, who had come of age and literally drove him crazy. She avoided him and never went to that store for shopping. Nevertheless, Juan began to follow her on the streets, discovering where she was going, what paths she was choosing. The second worker who lived with him also noticed his unhealthy interest in Mariana and even tried to joke about it, not suspecting that Juan would soon commit a crime. After Juan became the only suspect in the brutal abuse and murder of Mariana, all available resources were put into searching for him. Initially, law enforcement agencies went to his house, believing that relatives might help him escape. However, his sister insisted that he was not welcome there and that Juan knew his relatives would immediately hand him over to the police. She was not even surprised by the terrible crime her brother had committed. Moreover, she described how he had abused her elderly mother and even attacked the old woman with a knife, threatening to cut her open like a pig if he was not given money for illegal substances. The search for the killer was a priority for the police because Juan was extremely aggressive, violent, and dangerous to others. The money stolen from the cash register would have lasted him a long time, but no one knew how he would behave next or whether he would commit another crime after killing. Throughout the month, the search continued in the Ecatepec area and surrounding suburbs because the police believed that the criminal could not have gone far. However, time passed, and no trace of Juan was found. Soon, information about the abuse and brutal murder of Mariana reached national news, and police from across the state joined the search for the brutal criminal. Juan Martinez's photo appeared daily on television news, was printed on the front pages of newspapers, and was posted on streets all over the country with the note, "Ruthless Killer at Large." A large cash reward was announced for information about his whereabouts, as well as for assistance in his arrest, which was constantly increasing. But even this did not contribute to any progress in the case. The search for the criminal proved difficult, as he had not maintained contact with any relatives and had no friends. Additionally, Juan did not have social media pages and did not even use a mobile phone, let alone credit cards. After 6 months of unsuccessful search attempts, the reward for any information about him was increased to 500,000 Mexican pesos. Even this, however, did not help. Justice for the murder took over 2 years, finally arriving in August 2019 when her executioner was located and arrested. He was found in another state, almost 1,000 kilometers from the crime scene, when he was accidentally recognized on the street by a vigilant elderly woman. He constantly hid his face behind a hood and sunglasses, seemed suspicious to her, so she decided to report him to the police, not suspecting that he was one of Mexico's most wanted criminals. Juan was arrested right on one of the city streets, and to the surprise of law enforcement agencies, he did not even resist. He obediently held out his hands, allowing them to put handcuffs on him. The next day, after his identity was confirmed, the criminal was taken to the city of Ecatepec, where he had committed his crime. He was placed in custody in one of the city's prisons awaiting trial. In May 2022, 5 years after the tragedy, the killer and abuser was finally sentenced. Juan Martinez received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Additionally, he was ordered to pay 1 million Mexican pesos in compensation for moral damages to the family of Mariana. Mariana's parents and brother said the arrest of the killer was a huge relief to them, as he would certainly not be able to harm other girls. However, even life imprisonment and a large monetary compensation cannot erase the pain from their hearts, as their beloved daughter and sister will not return. They will have to live with this for the rest of their days.
When the police arrived at the house, they immediately sensed something was wrong. There were no broken windows or signs of forced entry. A quiet bedroom with a man lying on the floor in his pajamas. His glasses sat neatly on the nightstand. A kitchen knife and a cricket bat were nearby, and the door was tied shut with a bathrobe belt. The oddest detail was that his girlfriend, Jane Andrews, was missing. What happened that night, and where could Jane be? Jane Dawn Elizabeth Andrews was born on April 1st, 1967 in Cleethorpes, Lincolnshire, England. Due to financial difficulties, her family had to move to Grimsby, which was not their preferred choice. Her father, a joiner, had trouble finding steady work and often switched between temporary jobs, leaving the family without consistent support. Jane's mother managed the household by first working in social care and later as a teaching assistant. Although her job provided a stable income, it was not sufficient to meet their needs. Eventually, the family was forced to move into a much smaller home that lacked a bathroom, having only an outdoor toilet. Their situation was extremely challenging. They frequently searched the house for spare coins to buy a loaf of bread. Despite their struggles, they kept their difficulties to themselves, and their relatives were unaware of how tough their circumstances truly were. Jane was a bright and curious child. Her teachers recognized her potential. However, during her teenage years, she faced mental health challenges, including depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. As a result, her grades fell, and she started skipping school. When her mother discovered this, Jane felt ashamed. She didn't intend to rebel, but simply couldn't handle her situation. She began to feel hopeless and as though her life lacked purpose. Eventually, in a moment of profound despair, Jane tried to take her own life by ingesting a large number of pills. Although she survived, her mental health continued to worsen. As Jane got older, she found herself turning to brief relationships for comfort. At 17, she became pregnant, but realized that the father wasn't committed, and she felt unprepared to raise a child on her own. So, she made the tough decision to terminate the pregnancy. Initially, it seemed like the right choice, but it left her with lingering feelings of regret. To move forward, she enrolled in a fashion design program in high school. After graduating, she started working as a designer for children's clothing at a British retail chain. Although the job wasn't glamorous, it was a step in the right direction. However, she still lived with her parents in Grimsby, and she was unhappy there. Jane yearned for a better life. She spent hours perusing fashion magazines, envisioning herself in those stunning outfits adorned with designer jewelry. She wasn't just dreaming of success. She was truly desperate for a change and a way to escape. In 1988, 21-year-old Jane saw a job advertisement in a magazine. A busy mother needed a dresser to assist her with wardrobe and styling. Assuming the mother was wealthy, Jane applied, unaware that this would lead her to encounter royalty. 6 months later, Jane was invited for an interview and found herself meeting Sarah, the Duchess of York and wife of Prince Andrew. They connected well, and within a week, Jane received a life-changing letter confirming she got the job. Jane's journey took her from Grimsby to Buckingham Palace, entering a new world. Her starting salary was £17,000 a year, modest for royal standards, but what truly mattered to Jane was the privilege of access. She traveled worldwide with Sarah, mingled with aristocrats, and rapidly began to transform herself. She took elocution lessons to soften her northern accent and adopted new clothes, mannerisms, and even a different identity. She had a goal. Instead of just working for the wealthy, she wanted to become wealthy herself. She dreamed of marrying into money to escape her previous life. In April 1989, she met Christopher Dunn Butler, a butler who seemed to embody her dreams. He was 20 years older than her, a senior director at IBM, wealthy, sophisticated, and powerful, the perfect man for Jane. However, he was already in a relationship. Undeterred, Jane and Christopher began a secret affair, but Jane wanted more than secrecy. She offered Christopher an ultimatum. He had to choose between her and his current partner. He chose her, and soon their relationship was public. Within a year, they were engaged, and they married in August. What started as a fairy tale quickly turned sour. There was no passion or chemistry. They felt more like friends than romantic partners. Jane became restless again. She began having affairs one after the other, leading to the collapse of her marriage in 1994. The divorce didn't upset her. She had already met someone new, Dimitri Horn, a Greek businessman and son of a shipping magnate. They were introduced by the Duchess of York at another elegant event. Jane and Dimitri quickly became inseparable, enjoying fine dining, traveling, and living the romantic life she had always dreamed of. However, problems soon arose. Jane's jealousy resurfaced, growing increasingly intense. If Dimitri glanced at another woman, she noticed. If he spoke to one, she reacted with controlling and possessive behavior. Dimitri eventually reached his breaking point and ended the relationship. In a fit of rage, Jane didn't just leave, she vandalized his apartment, slashed his clothes, and destroyed his belongings in a turbulent frenzy. When things calmed down, she resorted to taking pills again. But this time, the overdose wasn't fatal. She woke up feeling broken and alone. A year later, in 1997, Jane faced another setback. After 9 years of working with the Duchess of York, she was let go. The official reason was budget cuts. With Sarah now divorced from Prince Andrew, she could no longer afford the same staff. However, rumors suggested a different story. Sarah had reportedly started dating an Italian businessman and was concerned that Jane might catch his interest. Although there was no concrete evidence, the fear of betrayal lingered. Jane felt deeply hurt. She had dedicated herself to her role and rebuilt her identity, only to be dismissed. One thing was clear. Though she was determined not to return to Grimsby, she would remain in London. She started a new job managing the public image of a hotel in London, but just 2 months later, she was let go due to her lack of experience, which was apparent to everyone. Soon after, she found another opportunity at a high-end jewelry store in the city center. Jane took the job, not for the paycheck, but for the wealthy and influential clients she would meet. She was eager to network again. In 1998, a friend set her up on a blind date with a man named Thomas Ashley Cressman. Jane was 31 and Thomas was 37. From their first meeting, Jane was enchanted by him. He was tall, attractive, and successful, everything she had ever hoped for. Thomas came from an American family that had moved to the UK. His father was a self-made multimillionaire who built a successful chain of car dealerships across Europe. Thomas enjoyed a life of privilege, attending private schools and studying at a university in the United States, which was a stark contrast to Jane's childhood, spent with outdoor toilets and searching for coins. Thomas loved cars, especially sports cars. He enjoyed working on engines, often spending hours building and modifying them. He was charming, enthusiastic, and attentive. During this time, he fell for Jane. While she was in Greece with friends, Thomas called her every day. When she came back, he welcomed her with a large bouquet of red roses. They quickly became inseparable. Within 3 months, Jane moved into Thomas's house, but old issues reappeared. Jane struggled with seeing Thomas interact with other women. She would hover, interrupt conversations, and pull him away. Even during innocent discussions, she needed to be the sole focus of his attention, and the possessiveness that had harmed her previous relationships returned. From the very start, Jane Andrews had one clear goal: to become Jane Cressman. She believed that Thomas was the perfect man for her: wealthy, handsome, romantic, and ideally suited to be her future husband. However, Thomas was in no hurry to commit, and Jane was quickly losing her patience. She started dropping hints in public, hoping that the pressure would encourage him to propose, but Thomas remained silent. Why was he hesitant? Was he having second thoughts? Or was there someone else Jane needed answers? So she decided to check his emails. There, she discovered her worst fear: messages exchanged with a woman he had met on a flight to the United States. She didn't know how serious their relationship was, but in Jane's mind, it could only mean one thing: he was cheating. That night, Jane confronted Thomas about the situation. He tried to reassure her that he had only met the woman once, and the emails didn't mean anything. However, Jane was extremely angry and humiliated, demanding to know the truth. To ease her frustration, Thomas suggested they take a trip to Italy. This trip was planned around a motorboat show that he couldn't afford to miss. After Italy, they would continue to the French Riviera, where his family had a vacation home. Jane agreed, secretly hoping that this trip would be special. As their 2-year anniversary approaches, she wished that, in the romantic setting of the Riviera, Thomas would finally propose. However, when they arrived, they were joined by friends. They spent their days enjoying boating, attending shows, and having fun. But Jane was still waiting for the proposal she desired. After days without any sign of a ring, she finally asked Thomas directly about their future. His response was disheartening. He said there would be no engagement, not now or ever, and he was starting to have doubts about their relationship. Jane was shocked. The reality she had built in her mind collapsed in an instant. They were arguing loudly, frustrated. She called a friend to express her feelings in detail, speaking loudly so others could hear her. Even during the car ride to the airport with Thomas, his mother, and his nephew, she continued to vent on the phone. The atmosphere was tense, but Jane was indifferent to everyone else's discomfort. On Sunday, September 17, 2000, 2 days after their return to London, Thomas's mother tried to call him. There was no answer. She kept calling, but still no response. She assumed Thomas and Jane were out, perhaps having lunch, or just needed some time apart. However, when Thomas still hadn't called by the next day, his mother's worry transformed into fear. By Monday afternoon, she decided to contact his workplace. That's when she truly began to panic. Thomas hadn't shown up for work at all and hadn't sent any messages. This was completely out of character for him. His mother asked one of his co-workers to check on him since the office was just across the street from Thomas's home, and they had a spare key. The employee knocked and rang the bell, but no one answered. He opened the door and called out, receiving only silence. The downstairs area was empty. He then went upstairs and found Thomas lying motionless on the floor, with blood surrounding him. The employee quickly went outside to call emergency services, but it was too late. When the police arrived, they discovered evidence that shocked everyone. A knife, which was missing from the kitchen, had been used to stab Thomas in the chest. Nearby, an abandoned cricket bat was found. Detectives suspected that Thomas had been struck on the head before being stabbed. There were no defensive wounds on his hands, indicating that he had not fought back. He had been attacked while sleeping in his pajamas, and his glasses were on the nightstand. Furthermore, there was no sign of forced entry. There were no broken windows or damaged locks. This indicated that the killer was already inside the house when the attack occurred. A pressing question occupied the minds of all investigators. Where was Jane Andrews? Her car was missing, and her phone was not in use. Was she a victim or the perpetrator? The police released a bulletin asking the public for any information regarding Jane's vehicle. Friends, including Sarah, tried to reach her, but there was no response. Then there was a breakthrough. Her car was seen on a highway west of London, and surveillance footage at a gas station confirmed that Jane had been driving alone. Meanwhile, evidence inside Thomas's home became increasingly incriminating. Handwritten notes were discovered, including one that stated, "Thomas is horrible to me, he treats me badly," and another that questioned, "What have I done?" Even more concerning was the finding of Jane's blood-stained clothes in the hallway, a bathrobe with the belt tied from the bedroom doorknob to the stair railing. If Thomas had survived the initial attack, he would have been trapped and unable to escape. Additionally, someone had taken a shower, as traces of Thomas's blood were found in the drain. This was not a crime of passion. It appeared to be premeditated. Jane Andrews was now missing, and investigators worried she might be trying to leave the country since her passport and credit cards were missing. Suddenly, her phone came to life with messages she was texting friends to ask about Thomas, feigning ignorance. Although her tone seemed relaxed and indifferent, the police remained suspicious. They traced her location through her messages and discovered she was still in England, on her way to Cornwall. Throughout the day, she sent multiple messages, but one friend maintained steady communication with her. That evening, Jane sent a disturbing message. She had taken a large number of pills. An immediate search was launched. Helicopters flew over the highways and countryside. 4 days later, her car was discovered parked in silence. Inside, Jane was found barely conscious, slumped in the back seat. She was taken to the hospital, where doctors pumped her stomach, and once again, she survived. When Jane woke up, she denied any involvement in Thomas's death, claiming she was unaware of what had happened and insisting she didn't kill him. Initially, she suggested that someone had broken into their home, but detectives quickly confirmed there was no evidence of a break-in. Later, she did admit to something, but not to murder. She said it was in self-defense. Jane explained to the investigators that their relationship had been abusive, stating that Thomas had physically assaulted her and that she had hidden a knife under the bed for her own protection because she was terrified of him. She explained that she had never shared her experience of abuse because she felt ashamed. She had never encountered such treatment before. Jane recounted that on the night Thomas died, he attempted to intimate with her, and when she refused, he slapped her, causing her to black out. She claimed she could not remember stabbing him and believed that Thomas was still alive when she left the house. But what truly happened? After returning from the French Riviera, the tension between Jane and Thomas escalated on their first day back and continued into the next morning. The house was filled with yelling. Jane was relentless, screaming and breaking things in Thomas's home. The man who once gave her roses now feared what she might do next. On Saturday, just before noon, Thomas called the police to report a violent argument. He warned the operator that the situation could escalate dangerously for either person involved. However, no officers were dispatched because there was no physical crime, only a heated disagreement. The operator advised them to calm down, but by the time things settled, Thomas had already died. By the end of April 2001, Jane Andrews was on trial at the Old Bailey. She admitted to killing Thomas Cressman but argued it was in self-defense. She portrayed him as abusive, controlling, and violent. But those who knew Thomas did not recognize this image of him. After nearly 12 hours of deliberation, the jury found her guilty. Jane Andrews was sentenced to life in prison for murdering her partner. She appealed the decision, but her appeal was denied. 9 years later, in 2010, Jane was transferred to an open prison, where inmates can leave during the day and return at night. However, one day she failed to return and was missing for 2 days. Eventually, she was found in a hotel just 6 miles away, where she had been meeting her parents. Although there were no penalties for her absence, it negatively affected her parole hearing. As a result, her release was denied in 2012. In 2015, 4 years later, officials determined that Jane was no longer a threat to society. She was granted parole and was released after spending 14 years in prison. Unfortunately, her freedom was short-lived. In 2018, she was arrested again for harassment and spent another year behind bars. When she was released on August 8, 2019, she moved to Lincolnshire and began a new life working in a supermarket, stocking shelves. Jane experienced a dramatic journey, moving from royal palaces to prison and, ultimately, to a life of quiet anonymity. During her time in custody, She was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by intense emotional fluctuations, impulsive behavior, a profound fear of abandonment, and unstable relationships. Some experts suggest that this condition accounts for her violent outbursts, particularly her difficulty in coping with rejection, which was a significant factor in Thomas's murder. However, her mental health issues did not change the facts of the case, nor did they affect her sentencing. Thomas Cressman was just 39 years old. He had a bright future, a family, and many plans ahead of him. His death was sudden, brutal, and without reason. May we always remember him and let his story serve as a reminder of how fragile love can be, as well as the importance of asking for help when needed. A woman was discovered in her home under mysterious and alarming conditions. There were no leads or evidence for detectives to pursue, making it seem like the case would remain unsolved. However, an unexpected phone call changed everything. With one surprising clue, detectives revealed a truth that nobody could have anticipated. Kathy Blair was born on May 3rd, 1961 in California. She grew up in a caring family with her parents, a brother, and a sister. From a young age, she developed a strong love for the arts, especially music. Singing was her greatest passion. When it came time to choose a career, Kathy made her decision without hesitation. She enrolled at the University of Texas to study vocal performance and moved to Austin. After graduating, Kathy became a music teacher and a choir instructor at a Christian church. She loved her job, and her students admired her greatly. They recognized her deep passion for music, which inspired them. Throughout her life, Kathy was married 2 times, but both marriages ended in divorce. She raised her 2 children, a son and a daughter, as a single parent. In 2013, at the age of 52, Kathy relocated to a new home in a peaceful and safe suburb of Austin. She had long envisioned a place that met all her needs, and she had finally discovered the ideal one. By this time, her children were adults and living independently, while Kathy remained active in her music career, continued to lead the choir. In December 2014, Joseph Hargis, her 27-year-old son, came home to stay with his mother for a few weeks before his next military deployment. He wanted to spend some quality time with her. On December 5th, Joseph went out to meet friends and didn't come back until nearly noon the following day. When he entered the house, he called for his mom but was met with silence. Feeling uneasy, he started to check each room until he reached Kathy's bedroom. What he discovered there was horrifying. She was lying on the floor next to her bed in a pool of blood. Joseph instantly realized she was no longer alive. In a panic, he ran outside and called the police. When investigators arrived, they confirmed that Kathy had been dead for several hours. The large amount of blood at the scene indicated that this was a murder, not an accident. While medical experts examined the body, police began processing the crime scene. They immediately noticed that the drawers from a large jewelry box in her bedroom were pulled out and on the floor. It appeared the killer had taken some of Kathy's jewelry, which led detectives to initially suspect robbery as the motive. However, this theory felt questionable. For one, the intruder had not taken anything else. Valuable items like Kathy's laptop and phone were left untouched and in plain sight. The house showed no signs of being searched for more valuables, indicating the focus was solely on the jewelry. The timing of the break-in was unusual. Nighttime burglaries are rare. Most thieves typically break in during the day when people are at work. Additionally, this neighborhood was known as one of the safest in the city, making such crimes unexpected. Another puzzling aspect was the order of events. It appeared that the killer first murdered Kathy and then searched her home for valuables. Bloodstains on the jewelry box drawers and elsewhere in the bedroom indicated that the attack occurred before the robbery. This implies that the intruder attacked Kathy immediately upon entering her bedroom. There were no signs of forced entry at the front door, but investigators discovered that the back door was left unlocked. When they questioned Joseph about it, he mentioned that his mother frequently kept that door open. This led detectives to consider whether this was truly a robbery or if something more sinister was at play. They began to wonder if the killer had intended to murder Kathy from the start. If so, it raised a troubling possibility. Could the perpetrator have known her? Forensic experts faced significant challenges in their investigation, as they were unable to find any evidence to identify the killer. There were no fingerprints or DNA, leaving them without any leads. The only clue they discovered was a partial shoe print in Kathy's bedroom, found in her blood. Medical examiners concluded that Kathy had died from multiple stab wounds and exhibited signs of strangulation. Importantly, there was no indication of abuse, which strengthened detectives' belief that this crime was not random, but rather personal in nature. With no physical evidence to investigate, police turned their attention to Kathy's close connections, searching for anyone who might have a motive to harm her. They began with her son, as he had the opportunity to commit the crime. However, after verifying his alibi, detectives quickly eliminated him as a suspect. He had been with friends all night, and this was confirmed. Next, they interviewed Kathy's friends and colleagues in hopes of finding any conflicts or grievances, but everyone they spoke to stated that Kathy had no enemies. Kathy was well-liked, avoided conflicts, and dedicated most of her time to the choir. Just when it seemed like the investigation had reached a standstill, detectives uncovered a new lead. Several of Kathy's close friends revealed that she often talked about her second ex-husband, whom she had divorced 4 years prior to her murder. Kathy described their breakup as difficult. Her ex-husband continually harassed her and wouldn't accept their separation. She even confided in friends that she was concerned for her safety and requested that they not share her new address with him. Detectives located the ex-husband living not far from Austin. When they approached him, his reaction was alarming. As soon as they mentioned Kathy's death, he asked, "Was she shot?" This was suspicious. When they inquired about his activities that night, he claimed to have been in his RV for a short getaway. He allowed detectives to search his RV without a warrant, but they found no evidence, no weapons, no blood, and no signs tying him to the crime. With no solid evidence, they couldn't charge him. He remained a person of interest, but detectives had to keep searching for other potential suspects. A few days later, the detectives received an unexpected call from one of Kathy's friends with some unusual information. She and a group had organized a memorial service for Kathy, and during the ceremony, an unfamiliar man stood up to speak. Immediately, the attendees felt something was off about him. His tone and mannerisms made everyone uncomfortable. Even more puzzling was that none of Kathy's closest friends recognized him. Eventually, one of Kathy's friends identified the man. The friend had seen him before as a sales clerk at a local women's clothing store. The police tracked him down for questioning. The man admitted he had never met Kathy. He mentioned he had read about her murder and felt compelled to attend the memorial. While his explanation was odd, there was no evidence linking him to the crime, so the detectives had to let him go and continued their search for the killer. For several days, the investigation stalled until an unexpected development changed everything. A man contacted the police, claiming he had important information. He explained that he had recently purchased a new scope for his hunting rifle, which included a thermal imaging camera. Eager to try it out, he took a walk in the early hours of December 6th, heading towards a wooded area near his neighborhood. While walking, he noticed a car slowly driving by, which then pulled over to the side of the road. Moments later, a man exited the vehicle and walked down a nearby street, disappearing into the night. At the time, he didn't think much about it, but when he later heard about Kathy's murder, a connection clicked in his mind. He realized that the man he saw was heading in the direction of her house. He remembered that his thermal camera had been recording during his walk, so he reviewed the footage. To his surprise, he found the recording of the man clearly visible as he walked away from the car. This type of imaging only showed the suspect's silhouette, making it very difficult to identify him. However, the video still provided useful information. The man appeared tall, broad-shouldered, and had a unique walking style. Additionally, the camera captured his car, which gave investigators hope that they could at least identify the type of vehicle. They compared the man's height and build to two main suspects, Kathy's ex-husband and a suspicious man from the memorial, but neither matched the silhouette or the car seen in the video. This left the detectives even more uncertain about the involvement of both men, putting them back at the beginning of their investigation. In the following days, investigators continued to review the footage, hoping to find useful clues and identify new suspects. However, their efforts yielded no significant results, and the case reached a frustrating standstill once again. Then, on December 15th, a breakthrough occurred. That morning, a caretaker checking on an elderly couple, Sydney and Billy Shelton, called the police after noticing something was off when she arrived at their home. The front door was wide open, and there were obvious signs of forced entry at the lock. Upon entering the house, she went to the bedroom and was met with a horrifying scene. The couple was lying motionless in a pool of blood. Without delay, she contacted the police. Medical examiners later confirmed that both victims had been stabbed multiple times, just like Kathy. Detectives also observed a disturbing detail. Their jewelry box had been ransacked, with drawers opened and jewelry missing. Similar to Kathy's case, nothing else of value was taken. The striking parallels between this crime and Kathy's murder could not be overlooked. Investigators suspected from the start that the same perpetrator might be involved. The victims lived only 15 minutes apart. Both attacks occurred at night while they were sleeping, and in each instance, the killer emptied the jewelry boxes but left other valuables behind. From the beginning, investigators suspected that Kathy's murder could be personal, possibly committed by someone she knew. However, they soon had to reconsider this possibility. What if the victims were chosen at random for some unknown reason? Detectives searched for any links between Kathy and the Sheltons' common friends, places they frequented, anything that could connect them. Unfortunately, they found nothing. Their lives had never overlapped. This led to a frightening realization. They might be facing a serial killer. Suddenly, the case was not just about solving a murder. It turned into a race against time before he struck again. Police reached out to everyone connected to the victims, hoping someone would remember even the smallest detail that could help them identify the killer. They encouraged people to share any information, no matter how trivial it seemed, and, eventually, this approach proved effective. One of Kathy's friends recalled a conversation they had a few months prior to her murder. Kathy had mentioned an uncomfortable encounter with a handyman hired by her landlord to perform repairs at her house. She expressed that not only was the work done poorly, but the handyman's behavior also made her feel uneasy. Detectives reached out to the landlord, who helped them find the worker's contact information. This led them to a local resident named Timothy Parlin. They quickly learned that Timothy's brother regularly attended the church where the Sheltons were members, and Timothy himself had also been seen there. As they researched Timothy's background, they discovered something troubling. He had a criminal record with multiple arrests for theft, primarily targeting jewelry. At the time of the investigation, Timothy was on parole and staying in a long-term hotel. When detectives visited him, he agreed to answer their questions but requested to talk outside in the hotel parking lot instead of in his room. Initially, Timothy claimed not to remember Kathy, but as detectives provided more details, he recalled doing some repair work at her house. He firmly stated he was not involved in her murder and provided an alibi, saying he was working the night shift at a convenience store when Kathy was killed. However, detectives noticed discrepancies. Timothy was much shorter than the figure seen in the thermal camera footage, and his car did not match the one observed that night. With no concrete evidence to link him to the crime, they left without any further leads. An unexpected turn of events occurred. When detectives checked Timothy's alibi with his employer, they found out he had been fired a week before Kathy's murder, indicating he couldn't have been at work that night. The detectives hurried back to the hotel, but Timothy had already left. His wife answered the door and let them search their room, leading to a significant discovery. They found a pawn shop receipt showing Timothy had sold jewelry on the same day as Kathy's murder. The detectives went directly to the pawn shop and confirmed that the jewelry belonged to Kathy. Additionally, security footage from the shop's parking lot revealed that Timothy had not arrived in his own car, indicating he was using another vehicle. Upon checking the license plates, the police discovered the car belonged to Timothy's sister. This was vital because it closely resembled the car seen on the thermal camera the night of Kathy's murder. With this information, detectives obtained a warrant to search the vehicle. Forensic experts then examined the car and found blood traces on the front seat and floor. Lab results confirmed the blood belonged to Kathy, Police arrested Timothy and brought him in for questioning. Despite facing substantial evidence, he refused to confess and kept repeating, "These hands have never killed anyone." The detectives interrogated him for hours, pressing him on the evidence, and eventually, he began to crack, but not in the way they anticipated. He maintained his innocence, but claimed to know the actual murderer, a man named Sean Gant Benalcazar. Investigators were doubtful. The case against Timothy was strong, and his sudden shift in blame seemed like a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility. Nevertheless, they decided to investigate Sean as a precaution. The evidence they uncovered did not indicate that Sean was a murderer. Sean, a 30-year-old former science teacher with a degree in microbiology, had no criminal history and lived several hundred miles away from Austin, making his connection to the case seem unlikely. However, detectives wanted to be completely certain, so they traveled to his town to interview him. During the questioning, Sean acknowledged that he had met Timothy a few months earlier and found him to be suspicious. Although they hadn't communicated much since then, Sean made a surprising revelation. He had been in Austin on the nights of both murders. Furthermore, he disclosed that he had stayed at Timothy's house during that time, adding to the confusion of the situation. Initially, Sean stated that Timothy left the house without saying anything on the night Kathy was murdered. However, just minutes later, he changed his account and admitted they had gone to Kathy's house together. He claimed that Timothy got out of the car and came back a few minutes later with a bag that was stained with blood. When Sean looked inside the bag, he saw some jewelry. At that moment, he understood that Timothy had done something awful, but he maintained that he had no knowledge of what would happen and had never intended to be involved in any crime. As detectives continued to question Sean, he requested to use the restroom, and they allowed him to leave the room. One of the investigators observed him as he walked away and realized that his stride, posture, and movements were strikingly similar to the figure seen on the thermal camera the night Kathy was murdered. This observation raised serious doubts about Sean's honesty. The detectives began to strongly suspect that Sean might be the actual killer, but without a confession, they lacked solid evidence to build a case against him. In contrast, they had some physical evidence linking Timothy to the crime, but with Sean, they had nothing at all. When he came back from the restroom, they continued to question him, doubting his account of what happened. They suggested that they didn't believe he had simply stayed in the car and even implied that Timothy might have forced him into Kathy's house under threat. This tactic worked, and after some hesitation, Sean finally confessed that he had gone into the house by himself. He said he entered with the intention of stealing valuables, while Timothy waited outside. He mentioned that he slipped in through the unlocked back door and started searching the rooms for items to take. In Kathy's bedroom, he spotted the jewelry box while Kathy was still asleep in bed. Sean initially maintained that he had carefully taken the valuables and left without harming Kathy. He even suggested that Timothy might have returned to the house after the robbery and killed Kathy for unknown reasons. However, the detectives didn't believe him. They discovered blood on the jewelry box, indicating that the killer had taken the valuables only after the murder, which completely contradicted Sean's story. They continued to question him, dismantling his lies one by one, until he finally confessed. Sean admitted to killing Kathy. He claimed that when he entered her bedroom, she woke up and lunged at him. In a panic, he grabbed a knife and stabbed her multiple times. After she was dead, he took the jewelry, hurried out of the house, and got back into his car. Detectives were skeptical of Sean's story. They found it difficult to believe that Kathy had suddenly lunged at him, trying to grab his knife. However, his confession was sufficient to arrest him. To build their case, they collected his shoes and had forensic experts analyze the soles, which matched the bloody footprint found in Kathy's bedroom perfectly. Despite this evidence, there was a significant issue regarding the murder of the elderly couple. When detectives asked Sean about it, his attitude changed completely. He requested a lawyer and refused to answer any more questions. With no direct evidence linking him to that murder, the investigators faced a dead end. They returned to Timothy, who had been arrested as an accomplice in Kathy's murder. Under Texas law, this meant he faced the same charges as Sean, even though he did not physically take part in the killing. Timothy acknowledged that he drove Sean to Kathy's house, but insisted he never got out of the car and had no idea Sean intended to kill her. However, he admitted to selling Kathy's stolen jewelry, which linked him directly to the crime. When detectives questioned him about the murder of Shelton's, he confessed that he and Sean had gone there to rob the house as well. Again, he maintained that he stayed in the car while Sean entered the house. Investigators looked into the possibility that Timothy was being honest. The thermal camera footage from Kathy's murder clearly showed only one person leaving the vehicle. If the same situation occurred in the second crime, it suggested that Sean had acted alone again. Ultimately, Timothy was charged with all 3 murders because of his involvement, despite not having directly committed the killings. Meanwhile, Sean faced official charges for Kathy's murder, but detectives had not yet been able to prove his connection to the second case. The court decided that Timothy and Sean would have separate trials. During Timothy's trial, he claimed he was not involved in the murders and was unaware that Sean intended to kill anyone. However, this did not alter the reality that he had driven Sean to both crime scenes and had benefited from selling stolen jewelry belonging to Kathy. Ultimately, in November 2018, the jury found Timothy Parlin guilty, resulting in a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. Sean's trial was considerably more complex. Unlike Timothy, who was connected to Kathy's case through physical evidence, Sean's case relied mainly on his confession, a shoe print discovered in Kathy's bedroom, and footage from thermal cameras. His lawyer quickly challenged the evidence, arguing that detectives had forced Sean to confess and pressured him to accept responsibility for a crime he didn't commit. The lawyer also maintained that the other evidence was merely circumstantial. Consequently, the jury was unable to agree on a verdict, leading the judge to declare a mistrial. Prosecutors continued their efforts, and a few months later, Sean faced a second trial. This time, the jury was persuaded of his guilt, and he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for Kathy's murder. Although there were strong suspicions regarding the murders of Billy and Sidney Shelton, he was never officially charged with those crimes. Investigators remained convinced of his involvement, but they lacked sufficient evidence to file charges. In the end, both men faced justice, but many questions remained unanswered. Detectives could not figure out why Sean had killed his victims. If Kathy had truly woken up while he was in her bedroom, he could have easily escaped since it was completely dark, and she wouldn't have been able to identify him. It was clear that a simple burglary had turned into a brutal murder. Detectives struggled to understand the motive behind Billy and Sidney Shelton's deaths. They speculated that Sean might have had some interaction with them at church, possibly leading to a conflict that sparked his resentment, similar to what occurred with Kathy. However, this was just guesswork. In Sean's case, investigators could not dismiss the idea that he may have had no motive and simply wanted to kill. If that was true, it was likely he would have continued his spree if he hadn't been apprehended.